Something extraordinary happened beneath ancient waves 500 million years ago that would forever alter the destiny of life on Earth. While you settle into this moment of calm, preparing to drift through time itself, we're about to witness the most dramatic transformation in biological history. This wasn't destruction or catastrophe, but creation on an unimaginable scale. In oceans that sparkled under alien skies, life suddenly awakened from billions of years of quiet simplicity and exploded into forms so bizarre and wonderful, they seem pulled from dreams. Right now, as you listen to these words, you're surrounded by the descendants of that ancient revolution. Every creature that crawls, flies, swims, or walks traces its lineage back to those pivotal moments when evolution first learned to sculpt shells, carve eyes, and forge the blueprint for complexity itself. Take a breath and let your surroundings fade away. Whether you're nestled in familiar comfort or stealing moments between the demands of your day, we're embarking on a voyage that requires only your imagination. Close your eyes if you wish and let me guide you backward through time, past civilizations and ice ages, past the reign of giants and the birth of flowers, beyond even the first forests, to an era when our planet wore a completely different face. Strip away everything you know about the world outside. Erase the buildings that frame your daily life, the roads that connect your journeys, the trees that shade your walks. Remove the birds that greet each dawn, the grass beneath your feet, even the soil that nurtures growth. What remains is raw possibility, a canvas of stone and sand waiting for life's first masterpiece to unfold. Now envision vast waters stretching beyond every horizon, shallow seas that catch and hold the warmth of an ancient sun. These aren't the deep, cold oceans we know today, but something more intimate, more alive with potential. The seafloor lies close beneath gentle currents, and sunlight penetrates to touch every grain of sand, every ripple in the sediment. This is where our story finds its heartbeat. 540 million years have passed since those transformative waters receded, yet their legacy flows through every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of wonder you've ever experienced. The Earth then bore little resemblance to our modern world. Continents drifted in unfamiliar arrangements, forming archipelagos and shallow basins that cradled life's greatest experiment. Mountains thrust skyward and weathered away under relentless winds, feeding minerals into hungry seas. But silence reigned supreme across every landmass. No rustling leaves whispered secrets to the wind. No insect chorus celebrated the turning of seasons. No footsteps, no calls, no stirring of grass beneath unseen creatures. The continents lay barren as moonscapes, wearing only cloaks of bare rock and shifting dust. Yet this apparent emptiness masked the greatest creative ferment our planet had ever known. Beneath those sun-warmed waters, revolution was brewing. For eons beyond counting, life had existed in forms so simple, they barely disturbed the ancient quiet. Microscopic beings dominated every drop of seawater, forming vast colonies that painted the ocean floor in living carpets. These bacterial communities pulsed with their own rhythm, slowly transforming the chemistry of sea and sky, preparing conditions for something unprecedented. Scattered among these microbial cities, a few large organisms had begun experimenting with multicellular existence. The Ediacara biota, as scientists now call them, represented life's first tentative steps toward complexity. These creatures resembled nothing in our modern world, taking shapes like quilted discs, branching fronds and segmented ribbons. They drifted through their ancient realm without urgency, lacking the tools of active hunting or rapid escape that would soon revolutionize survival itself. These early pioneers possessed no armor to shield themselves from danger, no weapons to claim territory or capture prey, no sophisticated senses to navigate their world. They lived as passive participants in existence, filtering nutrients from surrounding waters and growing slowly in the endless twilight of the deep past. Their legacy survives only as faint impressions pressed into ancient mud, ghostly outlines that hint at forms too alien for easy understanding. Then approximately 541 million years ago, everything changed. Within a geological instant, a mere 20 million years, life exploded into configurations that would have seemed impossible just moments before. The quiet seas suddenly teemed with creatures bearing shells that gleamed like armor, eyes that tracked movement with predatory precision, and appendages that could grasp, crush, and manipulate the world around them. This transformation, known as the Cambrian Explosion, represents the moment when evolution discovered its creative potential. Innovation followed innovation in cascades of biological invention. Organisms learned to construct skeletons from calcium and silicon, building frameworks that allowed for larger size and more complex internal organization. They developed muscular systems capable of rapid, coordinated movement, transforming from passive drifters into active swimmers, crawlers, and hunters. Most remarkably, they invented vision. Eyes appeared in dozens of different forms, from the compound arrays of early arthropods to the simple photosensitive spots that could distinguish light from shadow. For the first time in Earth's history, creatures could see their world, track prey across distances, spot approaching threats, and navigate through three-dimensional space with purpose and precision. The emergence of predation changed everything. No longer could organisms rely solely on passive filtering and peaceful coexistence. The development of hunting behavior created immediate evolutionary pressure for defensive adaptations. Prey species began growing protective shells, developing cryptic coloration, and evolving rapid escape responses. Predators in turn evolved stronger jaws, more effective toxins, and improved sensory capabilities to overcome these defenses. This arms race accelerated the pace of evolution beyond anything the planet had previously experienced. Each innovation triggered counter-innovations. Each adaptation spawned new adaptations, creating feedback loops that drove biological diversity to unprecedented heights. The major animal groups that dominate our modern world all trace their origins to this explosive moment of creativity. Nearly every branch of the animal family tree that we recognize today sent forth its first shoots during these crucial millennia. Arthropods emerged with their jointed legs and segmented bodies, destined to become the most successful animal group in history, eventually giving rise to insects, spiders, crabs, and countless other forms. Mollusks appeared with their soft bodies and protective shells, beginning journeys that would lead to octopi, snails, and giant squid. Even our own distant ancestry can be traced to these ancient seas. The first chordates, simple creatures with stiff rods supporting their bodies, swam in Cambrian waters, carrying within their cells the genetic instructions that would someday build backbones, brains, and the capacity for consciousness itself. The stage was set for every drama that would follow, every evolutionary story that would unfold across the next 500 million years of Earth's history. The creatures swimming in those ancient waters aren't strangers to us, despite the vast gulf of time that separates their world from ours. When you flex your fingers or blink your eyes, you're using mechanisms that first emerged during those revolutionary millennia, the nervous pathways that carry thoughts through your mind, the calcium framework that supports your body, the sophisticated organs that capture light and transform it into vision. All these marvels trace their blueprints back to innovations born in Cambrian seas. Those seemingly alien beings that populated primordial oceans weren't just random experiments in biological possibility. They were our ancestors, carrying within their cells the fundamental codes that would eventually bloom into every complex organism on Earth. The arthropod that scuttled across ancient mudflats shares essential genetic instructions with the butterfly outside your window. The primitive mollusk that first secreted a protective shell laid the groundwork for the octopus's intelligence and the pearl's luminous beauty. Consider this remarkable continuity as you settle deeper into contemplation. The very capacity for consciousness that allows you to ponder these ancient mysteries emerged from neural networks first wired together in creatures no larger than your thumb. When you observe a spider weaving its web or watch a crab navigating tidal pools, you're witnessing performances choreographed by evolutionary scripts written 500 million years ago. Rather than viewing the Cambrian as some distant, disconnected chapter in Earth's biography, embrace it as the opening movement of an unbroken symphony that resonates through every heartbeat of modern existence. Those early seas didn't just spawn strange fossils for museums, they birthed the continuing story of which we remain active participants. The same experimental spirit that drove trilobites to develop compound eyes continues to drive human innovation and adaptation. The transformation wasn't achieved through cosmic drama or planetary catastrophe. Instead, it unfolded through quiet persistence, countless small innovations accumulating like drops of water eventually carving canyons. These warm, shallow waters became laboratories where life first learned to craft tools from bone and shell, to coordinate complex movements and to perceive the world through newly evolved senses. If we imagine the Cambrian Explosion as evolution's grand premiere, then the eons preceding it resembled an extended rehearsal period. The theatre of Earth had been preparing for this performance across billions of years, with microbial actors taking their positions, atmospheric conditions adjusting like stage lighting, and chemical compositions fine-tuning themselves like an orchestra warming up before the conductor's first downbeat. Throughout those preliminary ages, existence maintained an almost meditative quality. Prokaryotic organisms flourished in every available niche, constructing elaborate communities without fanfare or complexity. These microscopic pioneers built living monuments called stromatolites, massive structures formed by countless generations of cyanobacteria capturing sunlight and releasing oxygen as their metabolic gift to the atmosphere. Envision those ancient coastlines bordered by underwater gardens of stromatolites, their layered domes creating landscapes that resembled alien cities. Each dome represented millions of years of patient construction by bacteria working in perfect synchronization, creating environments that slowly altered the planet's chemistry. Their humble labor gradually enriched the atmosphere with oxygen, unknowingly preparing conditions that would eventually support the energy demands of complex, active organisms. The Proterozoic eon stretched across 2 billion years of this microbial dominance, punctuated by gradual but profound innovations. Approximately 2 billion years ago, a revolutionary development occurred when eukaryotic cells emerged, featuring organized internal structures and nuclei that housed genetic material. This advance represented one of evolution's most crucial leaps, enabling cellular complexity that would eventually support multicellular collaboration. These enhanced cells possessed capabilities that their simpler predecessors lacked: sophisticated internal organization, improved energy production, and the potential for specialized functions within larger organisms. They carried the blueprints necessary for constructing tissues, organs, and eventually entire ecosystems of coordinated biological activity. Around 600 million years ago, multicellular experiments began appearing in the form of the Ediacaran biota, perhaps the most enigmatic chapter in life's early anthology. These beings defied easy categorization, taking forms that seemed borrowed from dreams rather than rational biological design. Some resembled quilted medallions pressed into seafloor sediments, others grew like soft fans swaying in gentle currents, and still others stretched across the bottom like living carpets woven from organic threads. The Ediacaran world maintained an atmosphere of profound tranquility that modern ecosystems would find impossible to sustain. No predators prowled these waters, no prey fled in panic, no territorial disputes erupted over resources. Instead, these organisms existed in peaceful coexistence, each occupying its niche without competition or conflict. They absorbed nutrients directly from surrounding water or grazed delicately on bacterial films, requiring minimal energy for their passive lifestyles. Walking through one of these ancient underwater meadows would feel like visiting a living meditation garden. Soft-bodied organisms rested motionless on microbial carpets, their forms strange yet somehow calming in their complete lack of urgency. No sudden movements would startle you, no predatory eyes would track your passage, no defensive reactions would ripple through the community. Life proceeded at the pace of growth itself, measured in seasons rather than heartbeats. These creatures possessed no hard parts, no skeletal frameworks, no protective armor, or offensive weapons. They lived entirely through gentle interaction with their environment, surviving without the need for complex behaviors or sophisticated sensory apparatus. Their fossil impressions, preserved in rare deposits of fine sediment, reveal organisms that seem almost plant-like in their stillness, yet clearly belong to the animal kingdom through their cellular organization and metabolic processes. The planet's physical geography during this period differed dramatically from our familiar continental arrangements. The supercontinent Rodinia had dominated earlier Proterozoic landscapes before fragmenting into smaller landmasses by Ediacaran times. Massive glaciation events, including periods when ice may have extended to equatorial regions in episodes called Snowball Earth, periodically transformed global climate and ocean chemistry. Recovery from these planetary ice ages may have triggered crucial environmental changes that encouraged biological innovation. As glaciers retreated, they released vast quantities of nutrients into marine environments, fueling explosive growth in microbial communities and altering ocean chemistry in ways that supported larger, more complex organisms. Atmospheric oxygen concentrations, while still lower than modern levels, had been steadily increasing thanks to photosynthetic microorganisms. By late Ediacaran and early Cambrian times, oxygen availability crossed critical thresholds that could support the metabolic demands of active, mobile creatures. Without this atmospheric preparation, the subsequent explosion of complex life might never have occurred. The mysterious disappearance of most Ediacaran organisms as the Cambrian period began raises fascinating questions about evolutionary transitions. These soft-bodied pioneers may have simply found themselves outcompeted by the new arrivals with their hard shells, active hunting behaviors, and sophisticated sensory capabilities. In ecosystems suddenly populated by predators, passive organisms without defensive adaptations became vulnerable to extinction. The Ediacaran represents evolution's final experiment with purely peaceful existence. Once predation emerged as an ecological strategy, the arms race between hunters and prey began accelerating, driving complexity and innovation at unprecedented rates. The gentle giants of pre-Cambrian seas couldn't adapt quickly enough to survive in this new world of biological warfare. Drifting through those pre-explosion waters would reveal a world of almost alien serenity. No fish would dart past your vision, no crustaceans would scuttle across rocky surfaces, no mollusks would burrow through sandy substrates. Instead, you'd encounter frond-like organisms swaying in currents, disc-shaped creatures resting motionless on bacterial mats, and enigmatic forms that challenged every assumption about animal design and behavior. This wasn't a world waiting for something to happen. It was a fully realized ecosystem operating according to entirely different principles than those governing modern biological communities. Yet, beneath this apparent stability, genetic innovations were accumulating, environmental conditions were shifting, and the molecular tools necessary for constructing complex body plans were being assembled piece by piece. Suddenly, the ancient seafloor began recording stories of transformation, where once only smooth bacterial mats had stretched unbroken across the ocean bottom. Intricate pathways now crisscrossed the sediment like highways carved by invisible travelers. These weren't merely random disturbances in the sand, but deliberate signatures of life learning to reshape its surroundings. Organisms had discovered mobility, and with that discovery came the power to engineer environments according to their needs. Beneath the surface, elaborate tunnel systems snaked through layers of mud and sand, creating three-dimensional neighborhoods where none had existed before. These subterranean architects were pioneering behaviors that would revolutionize how life interacted with the physical world. The once static seafloor transformed into a dynamic landscape of burrows, mounds, and channels, each modification altering water flow, nutrient distribution, and the very chemistry of marine sediments. This emergence of active lifestyle reflected profound anatomical revolutions occurring simultaneously throughout the animal kingdom. Soft-bodied organisms had reached the limits of what passive existence could achieve, but evolution was preparing to shatter those limitations through innovations that would echo through every subsequent era of Earth's biological history. Muscular systems evolved with unprecedented sophistication, allowing coordinated contractions that could propel bodies through water with purpose and precision. These weren't the simple expansions and contractions of earlier organisms, but complex networks of tissue capable of generating rapid, directed movements. Swimming became a possibility, then a competitive advantage, then an evolutionary necessity. Nervous systems emerged as biological command centers, processing information and coordinating responses with speed that transformed survival from passive endurance into active strategy. These early neural networks, though simple by modern standards, represented quantum leaps in biological computing power. Suddenly, organisms could sense danger, evaluate options, and execute escape maneuvers within fractions of seconds. Skeletal innovations provided both protection and performance enhancement. Hard external shells deflected attacks while creating anchor points for increasingly powerful muscles. Internal support structures allowed bodies to grow larger without collapsing under their own weight. These weren't just defensive adaptations, but architectural frameworks that enabled entirely new categories of biological design. Picture yourself hovering above one of these revolutionary ecosystems. Trilobites patrol the seafloor in coordinated groups, their chitinous armor gleaming like polished bronze under filtered sunlight. Each individual carries sophisticated compound eyes containing thousands of tiny lenses, creating mosaic vision capable of detecting the slightest movements across their visual field. These weren't primitive light sensors, but precision optical instruments that could track prey, spot predators, and navigate complex underwater terrain. Nearby, bristleworms execute elaborate spiral dances as they excavate networks beneath the sediment surface. Their tunneling activities don't just create homes, they fundamentally alter the ecosystem's architecture. Oxygen-rich water penetrates deeper into previously anoxic zones, nutrients cycle through new pathways, and countless smaller organisms colonize these newly created microhabitats. Swimming through the water column above, bizarre creatures test evolutionary hypotheses in real time. Some sport defensive spines that transform them into living pincushions. Others deploy tentacles equipped with microscopic hooks for capturing plankton. Shelled organisms experiment with architectural designs that balance protection against mobility, while others abandon armor entirely in favor of speed and maneuverability. Each of these biological experiments represents evolution's exploration of possibility space, pushing the boundaries of what living systems could achieve. Many designs would prove unsuccessful, their lineages ending without descendants. But others would establish patterns so successful they continue to dominate ecosystems 500 million years later. Predation emerged as perhaps the most transformative force during this period. For the first time in planetary history, organisms began systematically hunting other organisms as their primary survival strategy. This wasn't opportunistic scavenging or accidental consumption, but deliberate pursuit, capture, and consumption of living prey. Anomalocaris embodied this new ecological role with terrifying efficiency. Growing larger than most other Cambrian creatures, it cruised through ancient waters using undulating fins that could generate surprising speed. Its compound eyes, among the largest and most complex of their era, could spot potential meals from considerable distances. Most remarkably, it possessed flexible, grasping appendages that could snatch trilobites from the seafloor or pluck swimming prey from the water column. The circular mouth of Anomalocaris represented a masterpiece of predatory engineering. Overlapping plates could crush the hardest shells available in Cambrian seas, while the ability to expand and contract allowed consumption of prey much larger than the predator's normal mouth opening. This wasn't just feeding, it was systematic processing of other organisms for nutritional gain. Living under constant predation pressure forced rapid evolutionary responses throughout marine communities. Prey species couldn't simply exist, they had to actively avoid becoming someone else's meal. This survival imperative accelerated innovation rates beyond anything the planet had previously experienced. Vision systems exploded into countless variations during this arms race between hunters and hunted. Compound eyes evolved in arthropods, providing wide-angle surveillance capabilities perfect for detecting approaching threats. Simple eye spots developed in other lineages, offering basic light-dark discrimination that could trigger escape responses. Camera-like eyes emerged in yet other groups, sacrificing wide coverage for improved resolution and focus. This visual revolution transformed marine ecosystems from communities based on chemical communication to visually mediated networks of interaction. Prey could spot predators approaching from greater distances, but predators could also identify and track prey with unprecedented accuracy. The result was an escalating technological race played out in biological hardware. Skeletal systems diversified into countless architectural solutions during this creative explosion. Trilobites perfected articulated exoskeletons that combined flexibility with protection, allowing rapid movement while maintaining defensive capabilities. Mollusks experimented with shell geometries, some favoring simple domed shapes for maximum strength, others developing spiral configurations that could be rapidly sealed against attack. Brachiopods created hinged shells that could snap shut at the first sign of danger, while still allowing filter feeding when conditions seemed safe. Early arthropods developed jointed appendages that could serve multiple functions: locomotion, prey capture, food manipulation, and defense. Each innovation opened new possibilities while creating selective pressure for counter-innovations in other species. The fossil record suddenly became rich with preserved hard parts, providing paleontologists with detailed insights into Cambrian life that remain impossible for earlier periods. Shells, spines, and skeletal elements created libraries of information written in stone, documenting the emergence of complexity with unprecedented clarity. Not every Cambrian organism embraced predatory lifestyles or defensive armor. Many species filled newly available ecological niches that supported the emerging food webs. Suspension feeders deployed feeding structures that filtered microscopic organisms from water currents, transforming dissolved nutrients into accessible food for larger consumers. Deposit feeders developed sophisticated systems for processing sediments, extracting organic matter while bioturbating seafloor environments. These activities created positive feedback loops that enhanced nutrient cycling and increased ecosystem productivity. Grazing organisms maintained bacterial communities at optimal densities, preventing overgrowth while ensuring continued primary production. Reef-building organisms began constructing three-dimensional habitat structures that provided shelter, feeding opportunities, and nursery areas for countless other species. These early reefs, built primarily by sponges and other simple filter feeders, created biodiversity hotspots that supported disproportionately high numbers of species within relatively small areas. Ecological relationships became increasingly sophisticated as organisms developed specialized interactions. Predator-prey dynamics drove evolutionary innovations in both attack and defense strategies. Competition for resources encouraged efficiency improvements and niche specialization. Symbiotic relationships began emerging as organisms discovered mutual benefits through cooperation rather than competition. The morphological diversity achieved during Cambrian times remains breathtaking even by modern standards. Hallucigenia challenged every assumption about animal design with its spines, stilt-like legs, and ambiguous orientation that puzzled paleontologists for decades. Opabinia's 5 eyes and flexible proboscis, equipped with terminal claws, represented biological engineering, unlike anything in contemporary ecosystems. Waiwaxia's scale armor and defensive spines created a mobile fortress capable of grazing microbial mats, while remaining protected from most predators. Morella's delicate preservation reveals anatomical details, including individual bristles and internal organs, providing unprecedented insights into soft tissue organization in early arthropods. These weren't simply random variations on basic themes, but sophisticated solutions to specific ecological challenges. Each represented successful experimentation with novel body plans that pushed the boundaries of biological possibility. While many designs proved evolutionary dead ends, others established patterns that continue to influence animal architecture today. Continental configurations during Cambrian times created ideal conditions for biological diversification. Shallow seas dominated many regions, providing warm, nutrient-rich environments perfect for supporting complex communities. Rising and falling sea levels periodically connected and isolated populations, creating opportunities for geographic speciation and adaptive radiation. The Burgess Shale and Chengjiang formations preserve extraordinary snapshots of these ancient communities, capturing not just hard parts but soft tissues, internal organs, and behavioral evidence that illuminate the full richness of early complex ecosystems. Throughout the vast expanses of Proterozoic time, atmospheric oxygen concentrations remained frustratingly inadequate for supporting the energetic demands of complex animal life. While sufficient quantities existed to sustain basic multicellular organisms, the concentrations fell far short of what would be necessary to power large, active creatures capable of sophisticated behaviors. This scarcity created a biological ceiling that evolution could not breach regardless of genetic innovation or environmental opportunity. During the waning Ediacaran period, as the first multicellular communities began their tentative emergence, oxygen availability fluctuated unpredictably between feast and famine. These oscillations created unstable conditions that prevented sustained evolutionary investment in energy-intensive adaptations. Organisms could not rely on consistent oxygen supplies to fuel the metabolic processes required for building complex bodies or maintaining active lifestyles. Only as Cambrian dawn approached did atmospheric conditions finally stabilize at concentrations capable of supporting sustained biological complexity. This wasn't merely a quantitative increase, but a qualitative transformation that fundamentally altered what was metabolically achievable. The transition resembled switching from candle power to electric lighting, suddenly illuminating possibilities that had remained hidden in evolutionary darkness. Consider oxygen as evolution's fundamental currency, the universal energy standard that determines what biological investments become viable. In low oxygen environments, life operates on an extremely restrictive budget, forced to prioritize basic survival functions while abandoning any aspirations for sophisticated adaptations. Organisms cannot afford to maintain rapid locomotion, construct elaborate defensive structures, or power complex neural networks when their energy accounts hover perpetually near bankruptcy. But as atmospheric oxygen concentrations climb toward Cambrian levels, evolution's economic constraints relax dramatically. Suddenly, biological systems could afford to experiment with energy-intensive innovations that had previously remained prohibitively expensive. Muscular systems could develop the strength necessary for rapid movement. Visual systems could evolve the complexity required for detailed environmental monitoring. Neural networks could expand to coordinate sophisticated behavioral responses. The transformation affected every aspect of biological functions simultaneously. Metabolic rates accelerated, enabling faster growth, quicker responses, and more dynamic interactions with environmental challenges. Cellular respiration became more efficient, extracting greater energy yields from available nutrients. Cardiovascular systems evolved to transport oxygen more effectively throughout increasingly large and complex body structures. In those enriched Cambrian waters, oxygen represented far more than a dissolved gas. It embodied permission to transcend previous evolutionary limitations. The chemistry of seawater itself became an enabler of biological ambition, supporting experiments in living that would have been impossible under earlier atmospheric conditions. This liberation wasn't instantaneous, but unfolded across millions of years as organisms gradually discovered and exploited their newfound metabolic freedom. Predatory lifestyles exemplify the oxygen dependence of Cambrian innovations. Active hunting requires enormous energy expenditure for pursuit, capture, and prey processing activities. Predators must maintain high activity levels while scanning environments, tracking targets, and executing complex attack sequences. Without adequate oxygen supplies, creatures like Anomalocaris would have remained evolutionary impossibilities, their energy requirements exceeding what low oxygen environments could sustain. Prey species faced equally demanding metabolic challenges in their defensive adaptations. Rapid swimming, deep burrowing, and sophisticated sensory vigilance all required sustained energy investment that only higher oxygen concentrations could support. The evolutionary arms race between hunters and hunted depended entirely upon atmospheric conditions that could fuel both offensive and defensive innovations simultaneously. Geochemical evidence from Cambrian rock formations provides compelling support for this oxygen-evolution connection. Isotopic signatures preserved in ancient sediments document rising atmospheric concentrations that correlate precisely with the appearance of complex fossil assemblages. Geographic distribution patterns reveal that biological diversity flourished specifically in regions where oxygen availability reached optimal levels, while remaining sparse in areas where concentrations stayed low. This spatial variation creates a fascinating mosaic of evolutionary outcomes across contemporaneous marine environments. Imagine surveying different sectors of the same Cambrian Ocean and discovering dramatically contrasting biological communities separated by only short distances. In oxygen-rich zones, trilobites march across seafloors in coordinated formations, while predators patrol overhead and suspension feeders create bustling reef communities. Meanwhile, nearby areas with depleted oxygen concentrations host only scattered, simple organisms eking out minimal existences. Such patchwork distributions demonstrate that oxygen availability remained a limiting factor even during the Cambrian Explosion, with biological diversity tracking chemical gradients across marine basins. The most spectacular evolutionary experiments occurred where conditions proved most favorable, while marginal environments continued to resemble earlier, simpler ecosystems. As oxygen availability stabilized and expanded geographically, biological communities gained the robustness necessary to maintain complex ecological relationships. Animals could colonize previously uninhabitable regions, expanding their ranges and encountering new selective pressures. Niche diversity multiplied as organisms discovered energy-intensive lifestyle strategies that had been unavailable under previous atmospheric conditions. This process unfolded gradually across millions of years rather than occurring as a sudden transformation. Oxygen concentrations climbed incrementally while organisms experimented with increasingly ambitious adaptations. Each improvement in atmospheric chemistry enabled further biological innovations, creating positive feedback loops that accelerated both environmental and evolutionary changes. The relationship between oxygen and skeletal development illustrates these interconnected processes beautifully. Constructing mineralized shells or internal skeletons demands significant metabolic investment, not only for initial formation but for ongoing maintenance and transport. Under low oxygen conditions, soft-bodied designs remain energetically optimal, explaining the dominance of ediacaran organisms that lacked hard parts entirely. Higher oxygen availability changed these cost-benefit calculations fundamentally. With enhanced energy budgets, organisms could afford the metabolic expenses associated with skeletal construction while still maintaining active lifestyles. Shells and skeletons provided defensive advantages, structural support for larger body sizes, and anchor points for more powerful muscular systems, creating multiple evolutionary benefits that justified their energetic costs. The appearance of widespread skeletal elements also revolutionized the fossil record itself, providing durable materials that preserve far more readily than soft tissues. This preservation bias partially explains why the Cambrian explosion appears so dramatic in paleontological collections. But underlying this apparent suddenness lies the gradual chemical story of rising oxygen concentrations that made skeletal construction viable. Atmospheric balance during this period proved remarkably delicate, requiring oxygen concentrations high enough to fuel biological complexity while avoiding levels that might prove destructively reactive. Excessive oxygen availability can increase fire risks, generate harmful oxidative stress, and destabilize chemical systems that organisms depend upon for survival. The Cambrian atmosphere apparently achieved an optimal balance that maximized evolutionary opportunities without crossing thresholds into chemical toxicity. This equilibrium became the foundation upon which all subsequent animal life has been built. Modern ecosystems continue to operate within similar oxygen ranges, suggesting that Cambrian atmospheric conditions identified fundamental parameters for complex biological systems. Our own bodies reflect this ancient heritage through sophisticated oxygen transport and utilization mechanisms that trace directly back to innovations first developed in Cambrian seas. Contemporary human physiology demonstrates our continued dependence upon the oxygen abundance that first enabled complex animal life. Hemoglobin molecules in our bloodstream represent highly refined oxygen delivery systems, evolved from simpler transport mechanisms that appeared during the Cambrian period. Our energy-hungry brains consume disproportionate oxygen quantities to maintain the neural processing that consciousness requires, reflecting the oxygen dependence of complex nervous systems established during these early experiments with biological sophistication. The invisible gift of atmospheric oxygen shaped every aspect of Cambrian evolution, while leaving no direct fossil evidence of its crucial role. Unlike shells, teeth, or skeletal elements that preserve readily in sedimentary rocks, oxygen concentrations must be inferred from subtle geochemical signatures and isotopic ratios that require sophisticated analytical techniques to interpret. This invisibility reminds us that evolutionary processes depend as much upon environmental chemistry as upon genetic innovation. The biological forms that capture our attention in fossil collections represent only the visible outcomes of complex interactions between organisms and their chemical contexts. Understanding these relationships requires attention to both the spectacular anatomical innovations preserved in stone and the subtle atmospheric transformations recorded in molecular traces. Oxygen availability continued supporting Cambrian diversifications as marine environments became increasingly dynamic and complex. Enhanced metabolic capacity enabled organisms to maintain higher activity levels, supporting the bustling ecosystem interactions that characterize these revolutionary seas. The transformation from soft vulnerability to mineralized protection represents one of evolution's most revolutionary innovations, fundamentally altering the trajectory of life on Earth. These weren't crude experiments hastily assembled under pressure, but sophisticated engineering projects developed through countless generations of microscopic architects who learned to harvest minerals from seawater and transform them into living fortresses. The mastery they achieved in biological construction would influence every subsequent chapter in the story of complex life. To fully grasp the magnitude of this transformation, we must first revisit the world that preceded it. Envision those serene Ediacaran seafloors where disc-shaped Dickinsonia rested like organic medallions upon bacterial carpets, their quilted surfaces offering no resistance to external forces. Nearby, frond-like Charnia swayed in gentle currents, their delicate structures as fragile as autumn leaves. Cushion-shaped organisms nestled into sediments with the consistency of living pillows, completely defenseless against any potential threats. And predators existed in meaningful numbers during this earlier epoch. These soft-bodied pioneers would have faced immediate extinction. Their tissues could be torn apart with minimal effort, their forms disrupted by the slightest disturbance. The preservation of their fossil impressions required extraordinarily gentle burial conditions, and even then, only the faintest outlines survived to tell their stories. This was a world built entirely on peaceful coexistence, where survival depended upon avoiding rather than resisting danger. The Cambrian transformation shattered this gentle equilibrium completely. Suddenly, seafloors bristled with armored inhabitants, whose very presence announced a fundamental shift in biological strategy. Small-shelled organisms carpeted sandy surfaces like living cobblestones. Trilobites marched across the bottom wearing segmented armor that gleamed with metallic efficiency. Mollusk ancestors carried portable fortresses that could snap shut at the first sign of trouble. Spiny creatures like Wiwaxia navigated their world covered in scale armor that would deter all but the most determined attackers. For the first time in planetary history, prey species possessed genuine defensive capabilities that forced predators to develop increasingly sophisticated attack strategies. The mere existence of shells and skeletons initiated an evolutionary arms race that would continue escalating across all subsequent geological periods, driving innovation and diversity far beyond what earlier passive ecosystems had achieved. The fundamental principle underlying all skeletal construction involves harnessing environmental minerals for biological purposes. Ancient seas contained abundant dissolved calcium, carbonate ions, silica compounds, and other construction materials just waiting for organisms clever enough to utilize them. Early animals developed remarkable biochemical pathways capable of extracting these substances from surrounding water and depositing them into precisely organized structures both outside and within their bodies. The earliest skeletal elements appeared as microscopic spicules in primitive sponges, tiny silica rods that provided structural support for soft tissues. These humble beginnings established the basic principles that would later be expanded into elaborate architectural systems. From simple support rods, animals gradually learned to construct complete protective envelopes, articulated external armor, and internal frameworks that could support increasingly complex body plans. The advantages conferred by skeletal innovations extended far beyond simple protection. Shells created secure spaces where soft tissues could function without constant exposure to environmental hazards. Exoskeletons provided anchor points where muscles could attach more effectively, dramatically improving locomotory efficiency and power generation. Internal skeletons allowed organisms to achieve larger body sizes without structural collapse while maintaining the flexibility necessary for sophisticated behaviors. These innovations didn't just improve individual survival prospects, they opened entirely new ecological possibilities. Animals could excavate deeper burrows without structural collapse, swim with greater power and precision, and resist predation attempts with confidence that had never before been available to multicellular life. The ocean floor became populated by creatures capable of active resistance rather than passive endurance. Trilobites exemplified the revolutionary potential of exoskeletal design. Their calcium carbonate armor consisted of precisely articulated segments that provided both protection and flexibility, allowing rapid movement while maintaining defensive capabilities. When threatened, many species could roll into tight balls like modern pill bugs, completely concealing their vulnerable undersides within impenetrable spherical shells. The trilobite exoskeleton grew through carefully orchestrated molting cycles, with individuals periodically shedding their armor to accommodate increasing body size before secreting larger replacement shells. This process left countless fossil fragments scattered across Cambrian seafloors, creating the abundant material evidence that makes trilobite evolution one of the best documented stories in paleontological science. Trilobites represented just one lineage among many experimenting with mineral architecture. Brachiopods developed sturdy hinged shells and anchored themselves to hard substrates, creating the first successful sessile filter-feeding communities. Mollusk ancestors explored countless shell geometries, from simple domed configurations to elaborate spirals, each design representing a different solution to the challenge of balancing protection against mobility. Every major animal group contributed unique innovations to this explosion of skeletal experimentation. The cumulative result transformed marine ecosystems from communities of vulnerable soft-bodied organisms into dynamic battlegrounds where offense and defense evolved in perpetual competition. The emergence of widespread skeletal construction revolutionized the fossil record itself, providing paleontologists with abundant material evidence of Cambrian life that remains largely absent from earlier periods. While soft-bodied organisms require exceptional preservation conditions, like those found in rare deposits such as the Burgess Shale, shells and skeletons fossilize readily under ordinary circumstances. These durable remains accumulated on ancient seafloors, compacted into limestone formations, and persisted across hundreds of millions of years to provide direct testimony about Cambrian biological communities. The sudden abundance of fossilized shells creates the impression of explosive diversification that gives the Cambrian explosion its name, though the reality involves complex interactions between actual biological innovation and preservation bias in the geological record. The timing of this skeletal revolution reflects a convergence of multiple enabling factors rather than a single causative event. Rising atmospheric oxygen concentrations provided the metabolic energy necessary to support mineralization processes. Ecological pressures, particularly the emergence of predation, created strong selective advantages for defensive adaptations. Genetic regulatory systems evolved that could coordinate the complex developmental programs required for skeletal construction. Equally important were changes in seawater chemistry during the latest Proterozoic and earliest Cambrian periods. Weathering of continental rocks and volcanic activity altered the concentration and availability of calcium, carbonate, and other skeletal building materials, potentially crossing critical thresholds that made mineral architecture economically viable for the first time in Earth's history. The predator-prey arms race provided particularly powerful evolutionary pressures driving skeletal innovation. Once some species developed protective shells, others faced immediate pressure to either acquire similar defenses or develop superior offensive capabilities. Predators responded by evolving stronger mandibles, piercing appendages, and crushing mechanisms capable of breaking through protective barriers. Prey species countered with thicker armor, defensive spines, rapid burial capabilities, and sophisticated escape behaviors. Each adaptive innovation by one group triggered counter-adaptations by others, creating feedback loops that accelerated the pace of evolutionary change far beyond anything achieved during earlier periods of passive coexistence. The ecological consequences of skeletal architecture extended well beyond individual protection. As organisms died, their hard parts accumulated on seafloors, creating complex three-dimensional habitats that hadn't previously existed. Shell beds and skeletal debris fields provided attachment surfaces for sessile organisms, refuge spaces for smaller creatures, and structural foundations for early reef communities. These accumulations increased habitat complexity and ecological niche diversity, supporting higher levels of biodiversity than had been possible on the smooth bacterial mats that characterized earlier seafloors. The tiny architects weren't just protecting themselves, they were inadvertently engineering environmental modifications that benefited entire biological communities. Skeletal support systems also enabled the evolution of larger body sizes that had been impossible under previous structural limitations. Without internal or external frameworks, organisms remain constrained to small, thin configurations that allow efficient nutrient and oxygen transport through simple diffusion processes. With sophisticated skeletal architecture, animals could grow substantially larger while developing internal circulation systems, specialized organ complexes, and elaborate nervous networks that required structural support to function effectively. The architectural revolution of the Cambrian period represented far more than individual organisms learning defensive strategies. These pioneering creatures were essentially discovering how to collaborate with planetary chemistry itself, extracting building materials that had existed in Earth's oceans for billions of years and transforming them into sophisticated biological structures. The minerals they incorporated into shells and skeletons weren't novel inventions, but rather ancient geological resources finally being harnessed for biological purposes through newly evolved biochemical pathways. This partnership between biology and geology created unprecedented feedback loops that would fundamentally alter both Earth's surface processes and the evolutionary trajectory of life itself. When organisms began extracting calcium and carbonate from seawater to construct their protective armor, they unknowingly initiated massive changes in oceanic chemistry that would persist across geological timescales. The shells and skeletons they built eventually accumulated on seafloors, compacted into limestone formations, and became integral components of the planet's carbon cycle. Evolution had essentially learned to borrow from Earth's mineral treasury, transforming dissolved compounds into wearable architecture that provided both individual protection and collective environmental modification. This represented a quantum leap in the sophistication of life's interaction with its physical environment, establishing patterns of biological construction that would influence every subsequent era of Earth's history. These early architects weren't simply adding protective layers to existing body plans, they were inventing entirely new categories of biological design that opened doors to possibilities that had never existed before. From trilobite exoskeletons to the internal frameworks that would eventually support vertebrate bodies, every mineralized structure in the modern animal kingdom traces its ancestry back to those first Cambrian experiments in geological collaboration. Our own skeletal systems represent direct inheritances from these ancient innovations. The calcium phosphate crystals that provide strength to human bones utilize the same basic principles of mineral incorporation that trilobites employed in constructing their articulated armor. When we walk, run, or simply maintain upright postures, we're depending upon structural solutions first developed by tiny marine creatures 500 million years ago. The Cambrian Explosion's legendary diversity of forms becomes even more remarkable when viewed through the lens of skeletal innovation. These mineral frameworks didn't merely protect existing organisms, they enabled entirely new body plans, locomotory strategies, and ecological roles that would have been structurally impossible without hard parts. Predators gained bite forces capable of crushing armored prey, while defensive specialists developed spines and shells that could deter even the most persistent attacks. The fossil record itself was transformed by this architectural revolution. Paleontologists studying Precambrian rocks must search for rare preservation sites, where soft tissues left faint impressions under extraordinary conditions. Cambrian formations, in contrast, overflow with abundant skeletal remains that fossilized readily under ordinary circumstances, creating the rich documentary evidence that makes this period's biological diversity so visible to modern science. As Cambrian seas continued evolving, skeleton-building organisms diversified into countless variations on the basic theme of mineral construction. Trilobites alone generated hundreds of species, each experimenting with different approaches to segmented armor design. Brachiopods colonized seafloors with their efficient filter-feeding shells. Mollusks refined their protective architecture through countless iterations of spiral, domed, and spiny configurations. These mineral architects weren't working in isolation, but responding to an escalating arms race that demanded constant innovation in both offensive and defensive capabilities. The result was an oceanic environment that buzzed with structural complexity, populated by creatures whose very bodies testified to evolution's newfound mastery of geological materials. Yet even as these revolutionary developments transformed marine ecosystems through mineral architecture, another innovation was simultaneously emerging that would prove equally transformative: the evolution of sophisticated visual systems. The development of true eyes represents perhaps the most dramatic perceptual revolution in biological history, fundamentally altering how organisms could interact with their environments and each other. Prior to the Cambrian visual revolution, animal existence unfolded in a world of severely limited spatial awareness. Creatures might detect basic light-dark transitions or respond to the general direction of solar illumination, but complex visual perception remained beyond their capabilities. Navigation depended primarily upon chemical gradients, tactile exploration, or passive drifting with environmental currents. Imagine the profound limitations of pre-visual existence. Organisms could only react to immediate physical contact, follow molecular trails dissolved in surrounding water, or respond to direct touch from nearby objects. Predation remained rare partly because hunters couldn't efficiently locate prey beyond arm's reach, while potential victims had no early warning systems to detect approaching danger. The emergence of sophisticated visual systems shattered these constraints completely. Suddenly, predators could identify and track targets across significant distances, while prey species gained advanced warning capabilities that allowed defensive responses before physical contact occurred. The very concept of spatial relationships expanded from immediate vicinity to encompassing entire visible environments. Trilobites pioneered some of the most advanced visual systems of their era through compound eyes composed of numerous individual calcite lenses. These crystalline structures fossilized with remarkable fidelity, allowing modern paleontologists to examine their optical properties in extraordinary detail. Each compound eye functioned like a biological mosaic, with hundreds of separate lenses contributing visual information that created comprehensive environmental awareness. While trilobite vision couldn't match the resolution of modern camera-type eyes, it excelled at motion detection, the most crucial survival skill in a world suddenly populated by active predators and agile prey. The slightest movement across their visual field triggered immediate behavioral responses, whether flight from approaching threats or pursuit of potential food sources. Anomalocaris exemplified the predatory advantages conferred by advanced visual systems. Fossil evidence reveals massive compound eyes containing thousands of individual lenses mounted on flexible stalks that could track movement across wide fields of view. This visual sophistication provided overwhelming hunting advantages, allowing precise target acquisition and pursuit coordination that would have been impossible for blind predators. The transformation of predator-prey dynamics through vision cannot be overstated. Previously, encounters between hunters and potential victims occurred largely by chance, with success depending primarily upon luck and immediate reflexes. Visual detection systems changed these interactions into strategic competitions where advanced planning, evasion tactics, and pursuit strategies all became possible. Beyond individual survival advantages, vision enabled entirely new categories of social behavior and environmental navigation. Animals could coordinate group movements more effectively, identify suitable habitats through visual cues, and distinguish between different surface textures or substrate types. Even rudimentary light detection organs opened ecological possibilities that had never existed during the era of blind marine communities. The Burgess Shale and Chengjiang fossil deposits preserve remarkable diversity in Cambrian visual systems, documenting everything from simple light-sensitive patches to elaborate compound arrays containing thousands of individual lenses. This morphological variety suggests that eyes evolved independently multiple times across different animal lineages, each group discovering its own solutions to the challenge of extracting useful information from light patterns. The evolutionary significance of vision extended far beyond immediate perceptual advantages to encompass fundamental changes in neural organization and cognitive capability. Processing visual information requires sophisticated neural networks capable of integrating signals from multiple sources, recognizing patterns and coordinating rapid behavioral responses. As visual systems grew increasingly complex, brain development followed suit, creating feedback loops that accelerated cognitive evolution alongside perceptual enhancement. The development of sight wasn't merely about seeing, it represented the emergence of biological information processing systems that would eventually support the most advanced forms of animal intelligence. This intimate connection between vision and neural complexity established patterns that continue to influence animal evolution today, demonstrating how a single innovation can trigger cascading changes that transform entire biological systems. The geological conditions of Cambrian seas created the perfect theatre for vision's revolutionary debut. These ancient waters possessed exceptional clarity, enriched with life-giving oxygen and constantly stirred by the activities of countless burrowing organisms whose tunneling behaviors prevented stagnation and maintained optimal transparency. Sunlight could penetrate completely to the seafloor, illuminating every detail of this underwater landscape and creating a visual environment rich with exploitable information. Had these waters remained murky or poorly oxygenated like many earlier marine environments, the evolution of sophisticated visual systems might have been delayed for millions of additional years. But the Cambrian cradle provided ideal conditions where light detection organs could demonstrate their overwhelming advantages. In such crystal clear waters, the ability to see became an instant game changer, spreading rapidly through populations because the survival benefits were simply too dramatic to ignore. Once visual capabilities appeared, their impact rippled through every aspect of marine ecosystem dynamics. Predatory efficiency increased exponentially as hunters gained the ability to track prey across significant distances rather than relying on accidental encounters. This newfound visual advantage forced prey species into rapid defensive adaptations, triggering evolutionary responses in shell thickness, spine development, escape speed, and burrowing depth that transformed the entire character of biological communities. Prey organisms that successfully avoided visual detection passed their advantageous traits to subsequent generations, while those that remained conspicuous were systematically removed from the gene pool. This relentless selective pressure drove diversification into countless new forms and survival strategies, filling ancient seas with experimental designs that tested every possible solution to the challenge of avoiding predation. Vision served as the catalyst that accelerated the entire Cambrian explosion, transforming gradual evolutionary processes into rapid-fire adaptation cycles that generated biological diversity at unprecedented rates. The introduction of sight into marine ecosystems represented one of those pivotal moments in Earth's history when a single innovation unleashed cascading changes that would influence every subsequent chapter in the story of life. Consider how fundamentally different existence became once animals gained the ability to observe their surroundings. For the first time in planetary history, marine environments hosted creatures capable of recognizing shapes, tracking movements, and responding to visual cues with sophisticated behavioral strategies. Communication systems evolved that incorporated visual signals, courtship displays developed elaborate optical components, and navigation became possible through landscape recognition rather than chemical trail following. The visual world wasn't merely an addition to existing sensory capabilities, it represented a complete transformation in how organisms could interact with their environments and each other. Hunting strategies became tactical rather than opportunistic. Defensive behaviors evolved beyond simple withdrawal into complex evasion patterns, and social coordination reached levels of sophistication impossible in blind communities. Our own visual systems carry the genetic heritage of these ancient innovations. The fundamental developmental pathways that construct human eyes utilize molecular mechanisms first established during Cambrian times, when tiny marine creatures discovered how to capture and process light information. The genes responsible for eye development are remarkably conserved across animal lineages, demonstrating the deep evolutionary connections between modern vision and its Cambrian origins. The diversity of visual solutions that emerged during this period remains one of evolution's most creative achievements. Simple photoreceptive patches provided basic light-dark discrimination sufficient for detecting approaching shadows. Compound eyes constructed from multiple individual lenses created wide-angle surveillance systems perfect for motion detection. Camera-like structures with single focusing lenses achieved high-resolution imaging capabilities ideal for detailed target identification. Each visual design represented specific trade-offs between resolution, field of view, motion sensitivity, and energy requirements. Evolution preserved all successful solutions, which explains why contemporary ecosystems still display such remarkable diversity in eye types. Insects retain compound vision optimized for motion detection, vertebrates utilize camera eyes specialized for high-resolution imaging, and countless intermediate forms exploit unique combinations of optical principles. The Cambrian period served as evolution's testing laboratory for visual systems, with surviving designs continuing to influence animal architecture 500 million years later. Modern coral reefs filled with brilliantly colored fish, aerial ecosystems dominated by visually oriented birds, and terrestrial environments where visual communication shapes social behavior all trace their origins to innovations first developed in ancient seas. As vision spread throughout marine communities, behavioral adaptations accompanied the optical revolution. Burrowing organisms excavated deeper retreats to escape visual detection, while surface-dwelling grazers developed more cautious feeding patterns that incorporated constant vigilance for approaching threats. Predators refined their pursuit tactics, learning to exploit visual cues that revealed prey locations while minimizing their own conspicuousness. Even filter-feeding specialists benefited from visual capabilities by detecting favorable water currents, identifying optimal settlement locations, and recognizing environmental conditions that maximized feeding efficiency. The entire ecosystem reorganized around site-based interactions, with every behavioral strategy influenced by what could be observed and what could remain hidden. From paleontological perspectives, fossilized Cambrian eyes represent extraordinary windows into ancient perceptual worlds. Trilobite compound eyes, preserved with remarkable fidelity, reveal the precise arrangement of calcite lenses that created mosaic vision systems. Anomalocaris specimens display massive compound arrays containing thousands of individual facets that provided comprehensive environmental surveillance capabilities. These fossilized visual organs aren't merely anatomical curiosities, they represent preserved evidence of perception itself, documenting the moment when Earth's biosphere gained the ability to observe its own complexity. Holding such specimens connects us directly to the revolutionary emergence of sight, providing tangible links to one of evolution's most transformative innovations. Yet vision represented just the beginning of a much larger story rather than its conclusion. Once established, visual capabilities never disappeared from marine ecosystems, instead continuing to evolve and diversify across all subsequent geological periods. Every ecosystem since the Cambrian has included organisms that depend upon sight for survival, reproduction, and environmental navigation. The emergence of sophisticated predation marked another revolutionary transition that would define ecosystem dynamics for all subsequent eras. The ancient seas transformed from peaceful communities of passive filter feeders and grazers into dynamic battlegrounds where active hunters pursued elusive prey through complex underwater landscapes. Envision yourself observing one of these primordial hunting grounds through crystalline Cambrian waters. A trilobite navigates methodically across rippled sediments, its articulated legs maintaining steady forward progress while compound eyes continuously scan for potential threats. Compound visual arrays process environmental information with remarkable efficiency, detecting the slightest movements that might indicate approaching danger. Suddenly, a predatory shadow materializes from above. Anomalocaris descends through the water column with undulating grace, its flexible swimming appendages providing both power and precision control. Massive compound eyes focus downward with laser-like intensity while specialized grasping limbs prepare for strike deployment. The trilobite freezes instinctively, hoping to avoid detection through motionlessness, but previous movement has already registered on predatory sensors. The attack unfolds with explosive speed, as flexible appendages seize the armored prey in spine-studded embrace. What follows represents a violent struggle completely unprecedented in earlier marine environments, where encounters between organisms had been largely peaceful. This predator-prey combat epitomizes the new ecological reality that emerged during Cambrian times, where survival depended upon success in life-or-death confrontations. Such dramatic interactions became commonplace throughout Cambrian seas as predation pressure intensified across all marine habitats. The rise of efficient hunters forced corresponding evolutionary responses and defensive adaptations, creating feedback loops that accelerated diversification far beyond anything achieved during previous geological periods. The fossil record preserves abundant evidence of this evolutionary arms race through healed scars on trilobite exoskeletons, documenting failed predation attempts where prey managed to escape despite being attacked. Punctured and cracked shells reveal successful predatory encounters while demonstrating the intensity of forces involved in these ancient struggles. The widespread presence of defensive structures throughout Cambrian fauna testifies to the pervasive nature of predation pressure. Spines, scales, armor plating, and sophisticated burrowing behaviors don't evolve without strong selective pressures favoring defensive capabilities. Their abundance in Cambrian fossils indicates that danger was a constant presence, driving innovation in both offensive and defensive biological technologies. This predator-prey dynamic created positive feedback loops that generated much of the morphological diversity associated with the Cambrian Explosion, establishing patterns of evolutionary competition that continue to shape modern ecosystems. The transformation of Earth's biosphere during Cambrian times represented far more than anatomical innovation or ecological reorganization. For the first time in planetary history, the psychological dimension of existence emerged as organisms developed awareness of being hunted and the strategic consciousness necessary for hunting others. This cognitive revolution fundamentally altered the nature of life itself, introducing elements of strategy, anticipation, and environmental awareness that had never previously existed. Throughout billions of preceding years, biological interactions had maintained an almost meditative quality characterized by passive feeding, gentle competition for resources, and gradual environmental responses. Organisms reacted to immediate stimuli without complex behavioral planning or sophisticated threat assessment. The pace of existence remained steady and predictable, governed by simple chemical gradients and basic environmental cycles. The Cambrian explosion shattered this ancient tranquility completely. Suddenly, marine environments buzzed with pursuit tactics, ambush strategies, defensive maneuvers, and evasion techniques that required active decision-making and environmental monitoring. Movement patterns became purposeful rather than random, awareness levels intensified dramatically, and behavioral sophistication emerged as equally important to survival as anatomical adaptations. The seafloor transformed from a quiet carpet of bacterial communities into a dynamic theater where survival depended upon constant vigilance and strategic thinking. Organisms could no longer afford passive existence. They needed to continuously assess threats, evaluate opportunities, and execute complex behavioral responses that required unprecedented levels of cognitive processing. This psychological awakening introduced the concept of being aware of others in ways that went far beyond simple environmental sensing. Predators developed the mental capacity to track, stalk, and anticipate prey movements, while potential victims evolved heightened alertness systems that could detect and respond to predatory intentions before physical contact occurred. Visual capabilities proved central to this cognitive revolution, enabling both hunters and hunted to engage in sophisticated behavioral games that elevated survival from reflexive responses to strategic interactions. Predators equipped with compound eyes could observe prey behavior patterns, identify vulnerable individuals, and time their attacks for maximum effectiveness. Prey species with visual surveillance systems could monitor predator movements, recognize threat postures, and coordinate escape responses with remarkable precision. The relationship between hunters and hunted evolved beyond simple encounters into complex psychological warfare involving deception, misdirection, and behavioral adaptation. Burrowing became an art form practiced by organisms seeking visual concealment, while remaining motionless transformed into sophisticated camouflage strategies designed to exploit predatory reliance on movement detection. Even coloration and surface patterns likely played important roles in these early psychological games, though fossil preservation rarely captures such subtle details. The development of visual communication systems, territorial displays, and species recognition signals probably accompanied the emergence of sophisticated eyesight, creating layers of behavioral complexity that fundamentally altered ecosystem dynamics. The interconnection between visual evolution and predation pressure created positive feedback loops that accelerated both cognitive and anatomical innovation. Each improvement in visual acuity demanded corresponding enhancements in information processing capabilities, while more sophisticated predatory behaviors required increasingly complex defensive countermeasures from prey species. This arms race extended across every level of marine food webs, from microscopic interactions between tiny predators and even smaller prey to large-scale hunting scenarios involving the period's apex predators. Innovation pressure existed at every size scale, driving diversification among organisms ranging from bacterial consumers to massive swimming hunters. Rather than representing linear progress toward predetermined complexity, Cambrian evolution demonstrated how biological sophistication emerges from dynamic interactions between competing interests. The extraordinary diversity of body forms, from spike-armored defensive specialists to streamlined pursuit predators, resulted not from directed planning, but from countless individual struggles between organisms seeking to consume and those fighting to avoid consumption. This competitive dynamic established patterns that would influence every subsequent ecosystem throughout Earth's history. Modern predator-prey relationships, whether involving terrestrial mammals, marine vertebrates, or aerial hunters, all operate according to strategic principles first established during Cambrian times. The camouflage systems employed by contemporary cuttlefish, protective armor worn by armadillos, escape speed demonstrated by gazelles, and cutting efficiency of shark dentition all trace their conceptual origins to innovations developed in ancient seas. Within this revolutionary environment, trilobites emerged as perhaps the most successful and recognizable participants in the Cambrian experiment. Their fossilized remains carpet geological formations worldwide, creating abundant testimony to their extraordinary success during this period of biological innovation. Trilobites became iconic representatives of Cambrian life not merely due to their abundance, but because they embodied virtually every major adaptation that characterized the explosion itself. These remarkable arthropods pioneered sophisticated exoskeletal architecture that provided both protection and structural support, while requiring periodic molting cycles that left behind countless fossilizable remains. Their compound visual systems ranked among the most advanced optical instruments of their era, utilizing crystalline lenses to create mosaic perception, perfectly suited for motion detection and environmental surveillance. Segmented body plans allowed remarkable flexibility while maintaining defensive capabilities, with many species developing the ability to roll into protective spheres when threatened. This combination of mobility and defense proved extraordinarily successful in marine environments where predation pressure demanded both escape capabilities and protective measures. The diversity achieved by trilobite lineages during their evolutionary radiation remains breathtaking even by modern standards. Thousands of species explored virtually every available ecological niche, from active seafloor scavengers to specialized burrowing forms to probable swimming variants that inhabited open water environments. Their adaptability allowed colonization of marine habitats ranging from shallow tropical seas to deeper, dimmer waters where vision became less important than other sensory modalities. Trilobite visual systems provide particularly fascinating insights into Cambrian environmental conditions and behavioral strategies. Species with large, prominent compound eyes likely maintained active lifestyles in well-illuminated waters where visual surveillance provided significant advantages for both predator detection and prey location. Smaller-eyed variants probably relied more heavily on chemical and tactile sensing in environments where light penetration remained limited. Deep-water specialists evolved reduced or completely absent visual organs, demonstrating how trilobite lineages adapted to every available lighting condition from bright shallow seas to perpetually dark abyssal depths. These variations reveal not only trilobite behavioral ecology, but also the environmental diversity that characterized Cambrian marine systems. Fossilized trackways known as Cruziana preserve direct evidence of trilobite movement patterns and social behaviors. These trace fossils document purposeful locomotion across ancient seafloors, sometimes in organized formations that suggest coordinated group activities. Some paleontologists interpret linear arrangements as evidence for mass migration events similar to those exhibited by modern crustaceans, while others propose foraging behaviors where individuals followed disturbed sediment trails left by predecessors. Whatever their specific causes, these preserved movement patterns provide remarkable windows into active behaviors frozen in geological time, offering direct evidence of life in motion rather than merely anatomical structure. The patterns suggest that trilobites engaged in complex behavioral strategies that went far beyond simple random wandering. Exoskeletal ornamentation displayed extraordinary variation across trilobite species, ranging from smooth, streamlined forms optimized for rapid movement to heavily spined variants that presented formidable challenges to potential predators. These morphological differences likely served multiple functions including predator deterrence, sensory enhancement, and species recognition during mating or territorial interactions. Spiny projections made trilobites more difficult for predators to capture and consume, while streamlined profiles enabled more efficient swimming and burrowing activities. Elaborate surface sculptural may have provided hydrodynamic advantages, sensory capabilities, or visual signaling functions that we can only speculate about based on fossil evidence. The ecological significance of trilobites extended far beyond their individual success, to encompass major roles as ecosystem engineers. As sediment processors, they continuously stirred seafloor environments while feeding on organic debris and microscopic organisms. This bioturbation activity enhanced nutrient cycling, improved oxygenation of buried sediments, and created habitat complexity that benefited numerous other species. As prey organisms, trilobites supported higher trophic levels, including the period's apex predators. Their abundance provided reliable food sources that enabled the evolution and maintenance of sophisticated predatory communities. Simultaneously, their defensive adaptations drove predators toward increasingly specialized attack strategies, fueling the evolutionary arms race that generated much of Cambrian diversity. From contemporary perspectives, trilobites hold special significance due to their exceptional preservation and global distribution. These factors make them accessible to both amateur fossil collectors and professional researchers, providing tangible connections to Earth's most dramatic period of biological innovation. Handling trilobite specimens offers direct physical contact with successful participants in life's greatest experiment, creatures that thrive during the initial exploration of complex multicellular possibilities. Their segmented forms, compound eyes, and defensive adaptations represent solutions to survival challenges that remain relevant in modern ecosystems. Across these ancient seafloors, trilobites orchestrated a complex ballet of survival behaviors that would become legendary in paleontological records. Some individuals grazed peacefully among bacterial mats, their multiple legs working in synchronized rhythm while compound eyes maintained constant surveillance for potential threats. Others exhibited explosive bursts of speed when predatory shadows passed overhead, their segmented bodies flexing with remarkable agility as they sought refuge in crevices or temporary burrows. The molting process created particularly vulnerable moments when trilobites shed their protective exoskeletons to accommodate growth spurts. During these critical periods, soft-bodied individuals became easy targets for opportunistic predators, forcing them to seek secure hiding places until new armor could harden. The discarded shells they left behind became scattered across seafloors like abandoned suits of armor, each one destined to fossilize and contribute to the abundant trilobite record that defines Cambrian geology. Their crisscrossing movement patterns etched intricate networks of trails into sediment surfaces, creating trace fossils that preserve direct evidence of active behaviors. These trackways document not just individual movements, but complex social interactions, territorial boundaries, and foraging strategies that reveal sophisticated behavioral repertoires previously unknown in such ancient organisms. Overhead, predatory forms glided through crystal waters with patient determination, their enlarged visual organs scanning bottom surfaces for the telltale movements that betrayed hidden prey. In this perpetual theater of hunter and hunted, trilobites served as both primary actors and supporting cast, their abundance providing the ecological foundation upon which entire marine communities depended. The remarkable success of trilobites extended far beyond their Cambrian origins, spanning nearly 300 million years of evolutionary history. They weathered multiple mass extinction events, adapted to dramatic environmental changes, and diversified into thousands of species before finally succumbing to the great Permian extinction that ended the Paleozoic era. This extraordinary longevity testifies to the fundamental soundness of their basic body plan and the versatility of their adaptive strategies. During their long reign, trilobites achieved morphological diversity that rivals any major animal group in Earth's history. Some lineages evolved defensive spines so elaborate that rolled-up individuals resembled spiky spheres impenetrable to all but the most specialized predators. Others developed elongated tail sections, ornate head shields, or bizarre eye configurations that reflected adaptations to specific ecological niches. Size variations ranged from delicate forms barely larger than coins to giants exceeding 30 centimeters in length, with each size class exploiting different resources and habitat preferences. This dimensional diversity enabled trilobite communities to partition available resources efficiently, while avoiding direct competition between closely related species. The evolutionary radiation of trilobites reflects not only their internal adaptive flexibility, but also the extraordinary richness of Cambrian marine ecosystems. Numerous ecological niches awaited colonization by organisms sophisticated enough to exploit them, and trilobites proved remarkably versatile in discovering and occupying these opportunities. Their role in Cambrian predator-prey dynamics cannot be understated. Every predatory innovation developed by hunters like Anomalocaris represented, in part, an evolutionary response to trilobite defensive capabilities. Conversely, every protective adaptation evolved by trilobites reflected selection pressure imposed by increasingly sophisticated predators. This reciprocal arms race drove innovation in both attack and defense strategies, generating much of the morphological diversity that characterizes Cambrian fossils. Competitive interactions with other prey species further shaped trilobite evolution as they vied for limited food resources and optimal habitat locations. These ecological pressures encouraged specialization into distinct feeding strategies, microhabitat preferences, and temporal activity patterns that reduced direct competition while maximizing resource utilization efficiency. Modern fascination with trilobites stems partly from their alien yet somehow familiar appearance. Their compound eyes evoke insects, their segmented bodies recall crustaceans, and their defensive rolling behaviors mirror those of contemporary pill bugs. This combination of ancient sophistication and recognizable features creates bridges connecting us to Earth's deep biological heritage. Trilobite fossils serve as tangible reminders of evolution's long experimental history and the deep foundations upon which contemporary biological communities rest. Their abundance in museum collections and private fossil assemblages provides accessible connections to an era when life first discovered the possibilities of complex multicellular organization. While trilobites dominated visible seafloor activities during Cambrian times, equally important transformations were occurring beneath the sediment surface through the activities of burrowing organisms. These hidden architects lacked the armored grandeur of surface-dwelling arthropods and the dramatic predatory capabilities of swimming hunters, but their influence on ecosystem structure proved equally profound and far more persistent. The emergence of widespread burrowing behaviors fundamentally altered the physical and chemical characteristics of marine sediments in ways that would influence all subsequent geological periods. These changes weren't merely local modifications, but global transformations that affected ocean chemistry, nutrient cycling, and habitat availability on planetary scales. Prior to the Cambrian bioturbation revolution, vast expanses of seafloor remained covered by thick microbial mats that created stable, impermeable surfaces resembling living leather. These bacterial carpets trapped sediments, created relatively flat topography, and maintained chemical stratification that limited oxygen penetration to very shallow depths. Ediacaran organisms had lived upon these microbial surfaces, leaving gentle impressions while feeding passively on nutrients filtered from overlying water columns. The ecosystem operated according to principles of layered stability, with distinct chemical zones maintaining consistent properties across vast areas and through extended time periods. Cambrian burrowing organisms shattered this ancient stability completely. Worms, arthropods, and other excavators tunneled through microbial mats, disrupted sediment layers, and created networks of channels that allowed oxygenated water to penetrate deeply into previously anoxic zones. What had been stable, stratified environments became dynamic, mixed systems characterized by constant disruption and renewal. This biological reworking process, known as bioturbation, transformed seafloor chemistry through mechanisms that extended far beyond simple physical mixing. Burrow walls provided surfaces where aerobic bacteria could colonize previously oxygen-free sediments, creating new biochemical pathways for nutrient processing and energy extraction. Oxygen penetration into deeper sediment layers enabled oxidative breakdown of organic compounds that had previously remained preserved in anoxic conditions. This increased decomposition rate accelerated nutrient recycling, while altering the preservation potential for organic materials, including soft-bodied organisms that might otherwise have fossilized under stable burial conditions. The physical architecture of bioturbated sediment created three-dimensional habitat complexity that had never previously existed. Instead of flat microbial surfaces, seafloors became landscapes of tunnels, chambers, mounds, and depressions that provided microhabitats for countless organisms too small to create their own shelter structures. Each burrow system functioned as a miniature ecosystem supporting communities of bacteria, protists, and small metazoans that colonized tunnel walls, chamber spaces, and modified sediment zones. These cryptic communities contributed to biodiversity levels far exceeding what surface observations alone would suggest. Evidence for this bioturbation revolution comes primarily from trace fossils that preserve the shapes and patterns of ancient burrow systems. Unlike body fossils that document anatomical structures, trace fossils record behaviors and environmental interactions that reveal how organisms lived and influenced their surroundings. Cambrian sedimentary rocks contain abundant ichnofossils displaying remarkable diversity in burrow architectures, feeding strategies, and habitat preferences. Simple vertical tubes document basic shelter-seeking behaviors, while elaborate spiral and branching patterns reveal sophisticated foraging strategies and territorial organization systems. The variety of trace fossil types indicates that numerous burrow-building specialists had evolved by Cambrian times, each employing distinct excavation techniques and habitat modification strategies. Deposit feeders created meandering tunnels while processing sediments for organic content. Suspension feeders constructed vertical shafts that could be extended to maintain connection with overlying water, and predatory forms excavated networks designed for ambushing mobile prey. This functional diversity enabled burrowing communities to exploit virtually every available niche within seafloor environments, from shallow sandy zones to deeper muddy substrates. The cumulative impact of their activities ensured that no significant area of marine sediment remained unmodified by biological processes. The cascading ecological effects of bioturbation extended throughout marine food webs in ways that fundamentally altered ecosystem organization and function. Burrow systems created refuge spaces where small organisms could escape predation, while sediment mixing exposed buried organic materials that supported scavenging and detrital feeding communities. Enhanced oxygen penetration enabled aerobic organisms to colonize sediment depths that had previously supported only anaerobic communities, expanding the three-dimensional volume of habitable space within marine substrates. This habitat expansion supported higher biodiversity levels and more complex food web structures than had been possible under pre-bioturbation conditions. The cumulative impact of countless burrowing organisms working across vast expanses of seafloor created planetary-scale transformations that subtly but permanently altered Earth's biogeochemical cycles. These hidden architects didn't simply modify local sediment conditions, they initiated global changes in ocean chemistry, atmospheric composition, and carbon storage patterns that would influence planetary systems for the remainder of Earth's history. From paleontological perspectives, these creatures offer profound lessons about the relationship between fossil preservation and ecological importance. Unlike the spectacular skeletons of trilobites or the dramatic predatory apparatus of Anomalocaris, burrowing organisms rarely left behind impressive anatomical remains. Instead, their legacy exists in the subtle traces, tunnel patterns, and sediment modifications that hint at their former presence through indirect evidence. Yet these modest markings represent some of the most significant transformations in Earth's environmental history. The abundance of ichneal fossils throughout Cambrian rock formations demonstrates that biological activity had fundamentally shifted from passive existence to active environmental engineering. Animals were no longer merely bodies waiting for preservation by geological accident. They had become dynamic agents of ecosystem construction whose behavioral patterns shaped habitat availability for countless other organisms. When reconstructing Cambrian marine environments, it becomes tempting to focus exclusively on the charismatic megafauna preserved in exceptional fossil deposits. Trilobites marching across seafloors and predatory giants patrolling water columns capture imagination through their obvious drama and visual appeal. However, the true foundation of these visible ecosystems lay in the invisible layer of bioturbating activity occurring just beneath the sediment surface. This cryptic dimension of Cambrian life supported all surface communities through its constant reworking of habitat structure, nutrient distribution, and chemical gradients. Without the oxygenation, mixing, and habitat creation provided by burrowing organisms, the spectacular diversity of surface-dwelling fauna might never have achieved the complexity that defines the Cambrian Explosion. The evolutionary patterns established by these pioneer bioturbators continue to influence modern marine ecosystems across all ocean basins. Contemporary seafloors remain shaped by polychaete worms, crustaceans, and mollusks whose burrowing activities echo behavioral strategies first developed over 500 million years ago. Every instance of sediment disruption, oxygen penetration, or nutrient mixing in modern marine environments represents a continuation of processes initiated during Cambrian times. These ancient burrowers established bioturbation as a permanent feature of marine ecosystem function, creating biogeochemical cycles that have operated continuously since their first appearance. The steady, patient work of countless small creatures altering sediment chemistry, one burrow at a time, generated some of the most enduring transformations in the history of life on Earth. Their legacy serves as a reminder that revolutionary change doesn't always require dramatic innovations or spectacular anatomical developments. Sometimes the most profound transformations result from the accumulated effects of simple behaviors repeated by vast numbers of organisms across extensive geographical areas and long time periods. While these hidden architects were reshaping sediment environments from below, other pioneer organisms were simultaneously experimenting with three-dimensional construction projects above the seafloor surface. The emergence of reef-building communities during Cambrian times represented another fundamental transformation in marine ecosystem architecture, creating complex vertical habitats that had never previously existed in Earth's oceans. Contemporary coral reef systems, with their breathtaking biodiversity and towering structural complexity, represent the culmination of evolutionary processes that began with much more modest construction projects. The first reef-like communities bore little resemblance to modern coral gardens, but they established architectural principles and ecological relationships that would influence marine ecosystems throughout geological time. Early Cambrian reef builders lacked the sophisticated symbiotic relationships, advanced mineralization capabilities, and enormous construction scales that characterize modern coral communities. Instead, these pioneer organisms worked with simpler materials and more basic construction techniques, while exploring the fundamental concept of building elevated, three-dimensional habitat structures. Tuberges emerged as among the most important early reef architects, despite their apparent simplicity compared to more sophisticated animals. These filter-feeding organisms possess no nervous systems, muscular coordination, or sensory organs, yet they proved remarkably effective at their specialized ecological role. During Cambrian times, sponge diversity and abundance increased dramatically as these organisms discovered new opportunities in increasingly complex marine environments. Many sponge lineages developed internal skeletal frameworks constructed from silica spicules or calcium carbonate elements that provided structural integrity during life and preservation potential after death. When sponges died, their skeletal remains persisted on seafloors, creating stable surfaces that could support subsequent colonization by other organisms. Clustered sponge communities formed low mounds, raised patches, and textured surfaces that elevated portions of the seafloor above surrounding sediment levels. These modest elevations created the first examples of habitat stratification in marine environments, establishing zones with different current patterns, light levels, and biological communities. Archaeocyathids represented another crucial group of early reef builders whose unique contributions to Cambrian ecosystem architecture cannot be understated. These extinct organisms possessed distinctive conical or cup-shaped skeletal structures that resembled sponges in some respects, while displaying unique anatomical features not found in any modern animal groups. Archaeocyatid communities flourished, particularly in warm, shallow marine environments where abundant sunlight promoted high biological productivity. Their cup-shaped skeletons often grew in dense clusters, creating interlocking frameworks that provided structural stability while offering numerous spaces and surfaces for colonization by other organisms. The combination of sponges and archaeocyathids created Earth's first true reef systems, establishing three-dimensional habitat complexity that fundamentally altered marine ecosystem organization. While these early reefs remained modest in scale compared to later developments, they marked a revolutionary transition from flat, two-dimensional seafloor communities to vertically stratified, architecturally complex biological systems. The ecological significance of early reefs extended far beyond their immediate builders to encompass the countless organisms that discovered new opportunities within these structured environments. Reef systems created attachment surfaces for sessile organisms that required hard substrates for establishment, while simultaneously providing refuge spaces where mobile organisms could escape predation or adverse environmental conditions. Current flow patterns became modified around reef structures, creating zones of accelerated water movement that concentrated suspended food particles while generating calm areas where fine sediments could accumulate. These hydrodynamic modifications created microhabitat diversity that supported specialized communities adapted to different flow regimes and sediment conditions. Archaeocyathid reef systems achieved particularly impressive scales in certain geographic regions, forming extensive reef belts that stretched across hundreds of kilometers of continental shelf environments. These massive construction projects, preserved today as limestone formations in Siberia, Australia, and other locations, represent some of the most complex ecosystems of their time. The communities associated with archaeocyathid reefs included diverse assemblages of sponges, trilobites, brachiopods, mollusks, and numerous other early animal groups. These reef ecosystems supported biodiversity levels that exceeded anything found in contemporary flat-bottom communities, establishing reefs as centers of biological innovation and species richness. Despite their remarkable success during early Cambrian times, archaeocyathids eventually succumbed to extinction before the period's end, joining many other experimental lineages that failed to survive environmental changes or competitive pressures. However, their architectural innovations established construction principles that would be adopted by later reef-building organisms throughout geological history. The chemical conditions prevalent in Cambrian oceans proved particularly favorable for reef construction activities. Warm, shallow seas near equatorial latitudes became supersaturated with calcium carbonate, providing abundant raw materials for biomineralization processes. As organisms experimented with skeletal construction techniques, reef formation emerged as a natural consequence of their architectural activities. This relationship between reef growth and skeletal evolution created positive feedback loops that accelerated both processes simultaneously. Enhanced skeletal construction capabilities enabled more sophisticated reef architecture, while complex reef environments provided selective advantages that encouraged further skeletal innovations. Cambrian marine environments displayed remarkable heterogeneity, with reef systems creating some of the richest and most complex habitat patches within this diverse mosaic. Rather than uniform expanses of similar conditions, early Paleozoic seas hosted a variety of distinct ecological zones, each supporting characteristic biological communities adapted to local environmental conditions. From paleontological standpoints, Cambrian reef deposits provide extraordinary windows into ancient ecosystem structure and function. Fossil reefs preserve entire biological communities in their original spatial relationships, documenting not only the primary reef builders, but also the associated organisms that lived within these structured environments. Exceptional preservation in some reef deposits has captured sponges and archaeocyathids in their original growth positions, surrounded by shells, trilobite molts, and other biological debris that accumulated within reef framework spaces. These fossil assemblages function as snapshots of active ancient ecosystems, preserving ecological interactions and community associations that would otherwise remain unknown. The study of Cambrian reef fossils reveals detailed information about ancient marine neighborhoods, documenting predator-prey relationships, competitive interactions, and habitat partitioning strategies that operated within these early three-dimensional communities. These early reef systems, though modest in scale compared to modern coral monuments, created vibrant ecological hubs that concentrated biological activity and evolutionary innovation within relatively small geographic areas. Each reef represented a three-dimensional oasis of complexity rising from the surrounding two-dimensional seafloor, hosting communities whose diversity and interaction patterns far exceeded anything found in adjacent sediment-based habitats. The scenes of ancient reef life repeated countless times across continental shelf environments throughout the Cambrian world, multiplying opportunities for evolutionary experimentation and ecological specialization. These architectural achievements remind us that ecosystem transformation doesn't always require dramatic anatomical innovations or spectacular predatory adaptations. Sometimes the most profound changes result from accumulative processes carried out by seemingly simple organisms pursuing basic survival strategies. The sponges exemplify this principle perfectly through their patient, daily water filtration activities. Individual sponges lived relatively straightforward lives, drawing water through their porous bodies while extracting microscopic food particles suspended in marine currents. Yet, their collective activities, sustained across millions of years and vast geographic areas, created environmental modifications that fundamentally altered the trajectory of evolutionary history. These first reef builders were architecturally quiet in their construction methods, lacking the dynamic growth strategies and rapid colonization capabilities of modern coral systems. However, their ecological impact resonated loudly throughout marine communities, establishing three-dimensional habitat complexity that would influence ocean ecosystems for the remainder of Earth's history. As Cambrian life established its dominance across seafloor environments, organisms simultaneously began exploring the vertical dimension through skeletal construction and framework building. This upward expansion of biological architecture added unprecedented layers of complexity to ecosystem organization, creating new zones for interaction, colonization, and evolutionary experimentation. From these humble beginnings in mounded sponge communities and clustered archaeocyathid frameworks, the magnificent coral reef systems of later geological periods would eventually emerge. The fundamental principles of reef construction, habitat creation, and biodiversity concentration were established during these early Cambrian experiments, setting precedents that continue to operate in contemporary marine environments. Perhaps the most visually striking aspect of the Cambrian explosion was the extraordinary morphological diversity that suddenly filled ancient seas with forms unlike anything that had existed before or would appear again in Earth's history. Prior to this revolutionary period, the fossil record documents predominantly simple, soft-bodied organisms with limited structural complexity and relatively uniform body plans that reflected the constraints of passive lifestyles. The transition into Cambrian times shattered these morphological limitations completely, unleashing an unprecedented explosion of anatomical experimentation that produced creatures sporting spikes and protective plates, elegant spirals and efficient coils, specialized appendages and defensive armor systems. Evolution appeared to accelerate its creative processes exponentially, generating a spectacular gallery of biological designs that tested every conceivable solution to survival challenges. This remarkable diversification of form wasn't merely decorative elaboration or random morphological variation. Each structural innovation represented carefully tested solutions to specific environmental pressures and ecological opportunities. Defensive spines provided effective deterrence against predatory attacks, while protective shells offered reliable sanctuary from crushing forces. Spiral architectures enabled organisms to achieve larger body sizes without compromising structural integrity or mobility, while segmented body plans created opportunities for functional specialization and behavioral flexibility. The extraordinary fossil deposits preserved in locations such as Canada's Burgess Shale and China's Chengjiang Formation provide unparalleled documentation of this morphological creativity. Among the preserved specimens, we encounter creatures like Hallucigenia, whose elongated spines projecting upward from its body created nearly impenetrable barriers against predatory consumption attempts. This bizarre animal represents one of evolution's most creative defensive solutions, though its lineage ultimately failed to establish lasting dynasties. Opabinia presents another fascinating example of Cambrian experimentation, sporting 5 distinctive eyes arranged along its head region and a flexible proboscis terminated by a specialized grasping claw. This creature's body plan bears no resemblance to any contemporary animal group, illustrating the remarkable range of anatomical possibilities explored during this period of evolutionary creativity. Wiwaxia transformed defensive strategy into an art form through its elaborate arrangement of armor plates and protective spines that converted its soft body into a mobile fortress capable of deterring most predatory attacks. These creatures demonstrate how evolution responded to predation pressure through innovative approaches to personal protection and threat avoidance. The development of spiral shell architectures during Cambrian times established one of the most enduringly successful structural solutions in the history of life. Early mollusks, such as the Helsunellids, pioneered coiled shell designs that allowed significant growth while maintaining optimal weight distribution and structural integrity. This spiral geometry proved so effective that it has persisted throughout subsequent geological periods, appearing in diverse groups including gastropods, cephalopods, and numerous extinct lineages. These pioneering experiments in spiral construction established architectural principles that continue to influence mollusk design over 500 million years later, demonstrating the fundamental soundness of solutions developed during the Cambrian creative explosion. Defensive armor reached remarkable sophistication in creatures like the halkyrids, small organisms whose bodies were completely covered by hundreds of tiny protective plates supplemented by larger spines, positioned at strategic locations. This patchwork defense system created formidable barriers against predatory attack while maintaining sufficient flexibility for normal locomotory activities. The incredible variety of plates, scales, shells, and armor systems documented in Cambrian fossils provides direct testimony to the intensity of predation pressure during this period. Once active hunters began systematically pursuing prey, defensive adaptations became evolutionary priorities that drove innovation toward increasingly sophisticated protection strategies. Segmented body plans achieved new levels of complexity and functional specialization during Cambrian times, with arthropods like trilobites demonstrating the remarkable versatility possible through modular anatomical organization. Different body segments could evolve specialized functions for locomotion, feeding, sensory processing, or reproduction, creating opportunities for adaptive radiation that would make arthropods the most successful animal group in Earth's history. The fundamental principles of segmentation established during Cambrian experiments continue to influence arthropod design in contemporary ecosystems, from insects and spiders to crustaceans and their relatives. The modular approach to body plan construction proves so advantageous that it has remained a dominant architectural strategy throughout the subsequent history of animal evolution. Appendage diversity exploded during this period as organisms discovered countless ways to modify their external projections for specialized functions. Some species developed powerful grasping claws for prey capture, while others evolved paddle-like swimming limbs or delicate filter-feeding structures. Each appendage type represented a new method for environmental interaction and resource exploitation. The speed of this morphological transformation remains one of the most remarkable aspects of the Cambrian explosion. Within a geological time span of perhaps 20 to 30 million years, virtually every major animal body plan made its first appearance in the fossil record. The architectural blueprints established during this brief period have provided the foundation for all subsequent animal evolution, with later innovations representing modifications and refinements of Cambrian themes, rather than entirely novel approaches to biological construction. It's crucial to recognize that not all Cambrian experiments achieved long-term success. Many fascinating creatures, including the spiny hallucigenia and the peculiar opabinia, left no known descendants despite their obvious anatomical sophistication and apparent ecological success during their lifetimes. The Cambrian explosion represented a period of extensive evolutionary experimentation where some lineages established enduring dynasties while others disappeared without trace. This pattern of mixed success reflects the fundamental nature of evolutionary processes, which explore vast ranges of possibility without predetermined outcomes. The creatures that survived to establish modern animal lineages weren't necessarily superior to those that went extinct. They simply happened to possess characteristics that proved advantageous under the specific environmental conditions that followed the Cambrian period. The environmental conditions prevalent during Cambrian times provided ideal circumstances for this remarkable burst of morphological creativity. Enhanced oxygen concentrations supported more active metabolisms and energy-intensive lifestyles, while dynamic seafloor conditions created by bioturbating organisms generated diverse habitat opportunities. The emergence of reef systems added three-dimensional complexity to marine environments, providing attachment surfaces and shelter spaces that enabled new ecological strategies. Most significantly, the establishment of predator-prey relationships created intense selective pressures that drove innovation in both offensive and defensive capabilities. This evolutionary arms race generated much of the morphological diversity that characterizes Cambrian fossils, establishing patterns of biological competition that continue to influence ecosystem dynamics today. From contemporary perspectives, Many Cambrian animals appear almost alien in their anatomical organization and structural solutions. Their unfamiliar forms challenge our expectations about animal design while reminding us of the remarkable openness that characterized early animal evolution. Without established patterns or long-standing constraints, life explored morphological possibilities with unprecedented freedom and creativity. The exceptional preservation found in deposits like the Burgess Shale provides extraordinary detail about these ancient experiments, capturing not only hard skeletal elements but also soft tissues, delicate spines, and intricate appendages that reveal the full complexity of Cambrian body plans. These fossils serve as windows into a world where animals were actively inventing the fundamental principles of multicellular architecture. The legacy of Cambrian morphological innovation surrounds us in every contemporary ecosystem, from mollusk shells and arthropod segments to the architectural principles underlying vertebrate skeletons. Our modern world remains filled with descendants of those ancient experiments, living reminders of the time when life first discovered the extraordinary possibilities inherent in complex multicellular organization. Even the unsuccessful experiments retain profound importance, documenting the remarkable breadth of possibilities that evolution explored during this creative explosion. The Cambrian period wasn't about achieving morphological perfection, but rather about extensive exploration of biological potential during a unique moment when environmental conditions and evolutionary circumstances aligned to permit unprecedented innovation in the architecture of life itself. Evolution embarked upon an extraordinary period of morphological experimentation, testing architectural solutions that ranged from defensive spikes and elegant spirals to protective plates and flexible segmentation systems. Each design represented a unique response to survival challenges in rapidly changing environmental conditions. Some innovations proved remarkably successful, establishing lineages that would dominate ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years, while others vanished without leaving descendants, their fossil remains serving as testimony to paths that evolution explored but ultimately abandoned. Together, these diverse experiments created a spectacular landscape of biological diversity that established the fundamental framework upon which all subsequent animal evolution would build. To traverse a Cambrian seafloor would have been equivalent to walking through a living gallery of evolutionary experiments, where each creature embodied a different strategic answer to the universal questions of survival, reproduction, and environmental adaptation. The initial discovery of hallucigenia fossils presented paleontologists with interpretive challenges so profound that even experienced researchers struggled to comprehend the creature's basic anatomy. This small organism appeared to violate conventional expectations about animal body plans through its bizarre combination of elongated spines, stilt-like appendages, and ambiguous orientation that defied straightforward reconstruction attempts. Early paleontological interpretations flip-flopped repeatedly, as scientists debated fundamental questions about which end represented the head, whether the creature walked on its spines or legs, and how its various anatomical features functioned together as a coherent biological system. This confusion reflected not merely preservation difficulties or inadequate fossil material, but rather the genuinely alien nature of hallucigenia's anatomical organization. Over time, hallucigenia has achieved iconic status as perhaps the ultimate symbol of Cambrian experimental creativity, representing evolution's willingness to explore morphological possibilities that seem almost fantastical from contemporary perspectives. Specimens preserved in exceptional fossil deposits throughout Canada and China reveal creatures measuring only a few centimeters in length yet possessing structural features so distinctive they challenge basic assumptions about animal design principles. Modern phylogenetic analyses suggest relationships between hallucigenia and contemporary velvet worms, small terrestrial organisms that inhabit tropical forest environments. However, even with these potential evolutionary connections established, hallucigenia's specific combination of anatomical features remains without parallel in the modern world. The creature's elongated body supported pairs of legs terminated by sharp claws, while rows of defensive spines projected upward to create formidable barriers against predatory attacks. Its tiny head contained simple sensory organs, including a basic mouth and possibly primitive light detection structures that enabled basic environmental navigation. Hallucigenia's story illustrates the remarkable experimental nature of Cambrian evolution. when life explored body plan possibilities that appear almost alien because they don't correspond to any contemporary animal groups. This creature represents an early attempt to combine soft-bodied flexibility with rigid defensive structures, creating a mobile organism that could navigate complex seafloor environments while maintaining protection against predation attempts. The defensive spines would have made Hallucigenia extremely difficult for predators to consume, while its clawed legs provided secure traction for movement across various substrate types. The combination of mobility and protection proved effective within Cambrian ecosystems, though the lineage ultimately failed to establish lasting evolutionary success. Hallucigenia wasn't unique in its strangeness. The exceptional fossil deposits of the Burgess Shale and Chengjiang formations document numerous creatures that seem to defy biological classification through their unusual combinations of anatomical features. These exceptional preservation sites provide windows into a world where evolution was actively experimenting with morphological possibilities that have no modern equivalents. Opabinia represents another extraordinary example of Cambrian creativity, sporting 5 distinctive eyes arranged across its head region, and a flexible proboscis terminated by a specialized grasping appendage. This creature's appearance strikes modern observers as almost comical, resembling something from surreal artistic imagination rather than functional biological reality. Yet within its original Cambrian context, Opabinia's unusual anatomy represented a perfectly viable solution to the challenges of survival in complex marine environments. Its multiple eyes provided nearly panoramic vision that would have been invaluable for detecting both predators and prey, while its extensible proboscis enabled resource exploitation without exposing the entire body to potential dangers. Wiwaxia exemplified another successful approach to Cambrian survival through its comprehensive armor system, consisting of overlapping scales and prominent defensive spines. This small, oval-bodied organism transformed itself into a mobile fortress capable of deterring most predatory attacks while maintaining sufficient mobility for foraging activities. Scientific debates continue regarding Wiwaxia's evolutionary relationships, with some researchers proposing connections to mollusk lineages while others suggest affinities with polychaetae, worms. Regardless of its exact phylogenetic position, Wiwaxia clearly demonstrated the effectiveness of heavy defensive investment as a survival strategy during the predator-prey arms race that characterized Cambrian ecosystems. The Halkyarids represented yet another approach to defensive architecture, covering their elongated bodies with intricate mosaics of small armor plates, supplemented by larger protective spines positioned at strategic locations. These worm-like creatures transformed their soft bodies into segmented fortresses that could flex and move while maintaining comprehensive protection against attack. Fossil fragments of Halkyarids scattered throughout Cambrian sedimentary deposits document their abundance and success, though their complete body reconstructions required careful analysis of numerous partial specimens. When fully assembled, these creatures reveal sophisticated defensive systems that enabled successful colonization of various seafloor environments. The Cambrian seas hosted countless creatures whose morphological variety strikes contemporary observers as almost whimsical in its creativity and apparent randomness. Some organisms developed bizarre appendage configurations, others achieved unusual body proportions, and still others combined anatomical features in ways that challenge modern classification systems. Even creatures that seem more familiar to us, such as the great predator Anomalocaris, represented entirely novel approaches to biological organization when they first appeared. Anomalocaris pioneered large-scale predation through its combination of massive compound eyes and flexible grasping appendages, establishing predatory strategies that had never previously existed in marine ecosystems. Trilobites, despite their seemingly conventional appearance, actually embodied revolutionary innovations in segmentation and exoskeletal construction that established architectural principles still employed by arthropods today. Their success demonstrates how certain Cambrian experiments discovered fundamental solutions to biological engineering challenges. The apparent strangeness of many Cambrian creatures reflects their status as early experiments in multicellular body design, created during a period when evolution had not yet established the familiar patterns that characterize modern animal groups. Instead of following predetermined blueprints, evolution actively tested morphological possibilities, without knowing which would prove successful over geological timescales. Creatures like Hallucigenia, Opabinia, and Wiwaxia represent evolutionary side branches that functioned effectively within their original contexts, but failed to establish lasting lineages. These organisms worked successfully in their own time periods while exploring morphological territories that would never again be occupied by complex animals. The exceptional preservation conditions that captured these unusual creatures in sites like the Burgess Shale enable modern appreciation of their remarkable diversity. Under normal circumstances, soft-bodied organisms decay too rapidly to fossilize, but exceptional burial conditions preserved even delicate anatomical features in extraordinary detail. These preserved specimens provide intimate glimpses into biological communities that would otherwise be completely unknown to science. Without such exceptional preservation, our understanding of Cambrian life might be limited to hard-shelled organisms like trilobites, missing entirely the rich diversity of experimental forms that actually characterize these ancient ecosystems. Studying these enigmatic creatures teaches important lessons about the unpredictable nature of evolutionary processes. Rather than representing steady progression toward predetermined goals, the history of life reveals extensive exploration of morphological possibilities, some of which seem almost fantastical from contemporary perspectives. Paleontological reconstruction of these organisms has provided ongoing challenges and discoveries as new fossil material continues to refine understanding of their anatomy and ecology. Each new specimen adds details that can revolutionize interpretations, demonstrating the dynamic nature of scientific understanding about ancient life. For contemporary observers, these creatures capture imagination through their demonstration that life's history contains remarkable strangeness, and that our familiar biological world represents only one possible outcome among many that could have developed. Imagining Cambrian marine environments means envisioning galleries of living experiments where each organism embodied different solutions to universal survival challenges. Yet within their original contexts, these creatures were simply ordinary participants in their ecosystems, pursuing survival strategies that made perfect sense within contemporary environmental conditions. Their apparent bizarreness reflects our modern perspective rather than any inherent strangeness within Cambrian biological communities. What ultimately mattered for these organisms was successful survival and reproduction within their specific environmental contexts. Each creature discovered effective ways to meet these challenges, regardless of how unusual their solutions might appear to modern observers. Gradually, comparative analyses with other Cambrian fossils and detailed studies of modern arthropod anatomy led researchers to propose that Opabinia belonged to a stem group within the broader arthropod lineage. This classification suggests that while Opabinia wasn't a direct ancestor of any contemporary animals, it represented part of the extensive evolutionary experimentation that eventually gave rise to insects, crustaceans, spiders, and their countless relatives. In this evolutionary context, Opabinia embodied one of many morphological experiments tested during the Cambrian Explosion's remarkable burst of biological creativity. Its unusual combination of anatomical features represented novel approaches to solving fundamental survival challenges, even though its specific lineage ultimately failed to establish lasting evolutionary success. The creature's 5 distinctive eyes may have represented an early attempt at enhancing visual capabilities beyond what was possible with simpler light detection systems, while its flexible proboscis likely served as a sophisticated feeding adaptation that enabled resource exploitation in complex environments. Other Cambrian organisms display similarly unusual sensory and feeding structures, suggesting this period witnessed extensive experimentation with how animals could interact with their environments. Opabinia's peculiar design illuminates a fundamental principle about evolutionary processes. They don't work toward predetermined goals or optimal solutions. From our contemporary perspective, the proboscis appears strange and inefficient, but within Opabinia's original context, it functioned as a perfectly effective tool for survival and resource acquisition. The absence of proboscis-bearing animals in modern ecosystems doesn't indicate that this anatomical feature was inherently flawed or unsuccessful. Rather, it demonstrates that alternative designs proved more evolutionarily persistent across geological timescales. During Cambrian times, Opabinia thrived within its ecological niche, successfully hunting small prey and scavenging organic materials while coexisting with trilobites, worms, sponges, and countless other organisms. Its apparently bizarre appearance serves as a powerful reminder that what strikes us as strange or improbable was completely normal within its own historical moment. Evolution doesn't create organisms to satisfy future observers' expectations. It generates solutions that work within immediate environmental contexts. The scientific study of Opabinia also demonstrates the critical importance of exceptional fossil preservation sites like the Burgess Shale for understanding ancient biological diversity. Without such remarkable preservation conditions, soft-bodied animals would leave no trace of their existence, and our understanding of Cambrian life would be severely limited to hard-shelled creatures whose mineralized parts fossilize under ordinary circumstances. The availability of exceptionally preserved specimens allows paleontologists to document not just the armored trilobites and shelled mollusks, but also the delicate swimming flaps of Opabinia, the defensive spines of Hallucigenia, the armor scales of Wiwaxia, and countless other soft tissue features that reveal the true richness and strangeness of ancient ecosystems. For paleontological research, Opabinia represents far more than merely an evolutionary curiosity or anatomical oddity. It provides crucial evidence for understanding early arthropod evolution and the morphological experimentation that preceded the establishment of more familiar body plans. By comparing its distinctive features with those found in other Cambrian organisms, researchers can trace how anatomical structures changed over evolutionary time. The specific arrangement of Opabinia's head region, proboscis structure, and eye configuration provides insights into how early arthropods may have experimented with feeding mechanisms and sensory capabilities before settling into the more conventional arrangements that characterize modern groups. Each newly discovered fossil specimen adds anatomical details that refine scientific understanding of how creatures like Opabinia fit within the broader evolutionary narrative. From broader biological perspectives, Opabinia serves as a compelling demonstration of evolution's remarkable creativity and problem-solving flexibility. Its 5 eyes and snout-like proboscis may appear unusual to contemporary observers, but they illustrate the numerous different approaches that life can develop for addressing universal challenges of survival, feeding, and environmental interaction. The Cambrian period represented a time when biological rules had not yet become established through millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Opabinia's morphological design represented one among countless variations tested by natural selection during this period of extensive experimentation. While its evolutionary success proved temporary, its existence significantly enriches our understanding of life's potential diversity. When reconstructing Cambrian marine environments, we can envision Opabinia gliding gracefully above seafloor communities, its lateral flaps undulating in coordinated waves, while its proboscis probe burrows and crevices for hidden prey. Its 5 eyes would have provided comprehensive surveillance of surrounding areas, monitoring for both hunting opportunities and potential threats. Meanwhile, trilobites scuttled across sediment surfaces in their characteristic patterns, worms extended feeding appendages from protective burrows, and various other creatures pursued their own survival strategies within this complex ecological web. Overhead, larger predators like Anomalocaris searched for movement patterns that might reveal vulnerable prey, while Opabinia maintained its position close to the seafloor, carefully probing available microhabitats. To contemporary observers, Opabinia's appearance strikes us as profoundly alien and improbable. However, within the context of Cambrian marine communities, it represented simply one organism among many others, each displaying its own specialized adaptations for thriving within the period's unique environmental conditions. Opabinia fossils capture not only the anatomical details of this remarkable creature, but also the sense of wonder that accompanies scientific exploration of deep geological time. Examining such specimens provides direct connections to biological communities that existed over 500 million years ago, when complex multicellular life was first discovering the possibilities inherent in sophisticated anatomical organization. The creature's 5 eyes and flexible proboscis represent more than mere morphological curiosities. They embody tangible evidence of life's restless creativity and endless capacity for biological innovation. Although Opabinia's lineage ultimately vanished from the evolutionary record, the fossil documentation it provided continues to expand our appreciation for the extraordinary morphological breadth achieved during the Cambrian Explosion. While most Cambrian animals remained relatively small, soft-bodied and vulnerable to predation, the marine environments of this period also hosted something far more imposing and threatening. Anomalocaris, whose scientific name translates as unusual shrimp, represented one of Earth's earliest apex predators and achieved dominance within ancient ocean ecosystems through its combination of size, speed, and sophisticated hunting capabilities. Reaching lengths of up to 1 meter, Anomalocaris dwarfed most contemporary organisms by substantial margins. Its massive compound eyes, flexible grasping appendages, and circular mouth apparatus created a predatory package unlike anything that had previously existed in marine environments. This creature established new paradigms for active hunting that would influence ecosystem dynamics throughout the remainder of the Cambrian period. The initial scientific discovery and interpretation of Anomalocaris fossils illustrates the challenges involved in reconstructing ancient organisms from fragmentary remains. Early fossil discoveries were found as isolated body parts, leading researchers to misidentify the grasping appendages as independent shrimp-like creatures while interpreting the circular mouth structures as jellyfish specimens. Only through careful analysis and the discovery of more complete specimens did paleontologists recognize that these apparently separate fossils actually belonged to a single integrated organism whose complete anatomy proved far more remarkable than any of its individual components had suggested. The eventual reconstruction revealed a creature that was supremely adapted to the predatory lifestyle within Cambrian marine ecosystems. Anomalocaris possessed an elongated, segmented body lined with undulating flaps that enabled efficient swimming through coordinated wave-like contractions. Its fan-shaped tail provided both steering control and the capacity for rapid acceleration when pursuing prey or maneuvering through complex underwater terrain. This locomotory system made Anomalocaris a powerful and agile swimmer capable of active pursuit rather than merely opportunistic ambush hunting. The creature's head region contained its most distinctive and formidable features. 2 large, jointed appendages projected forward from the front of its head, each equipped with rows of sharp spines specifically designed for seizing and manipulating prey items. These flexible appendages could sweep forward with remarkable precision to grasp trilobites or other victims before drawing them toward the circular mouth structure. That mouth represented a masterpiece of predatory engineering, consisting of a ring of hardened plates that could open and close like a camera's iris mechanism. While early researchers hypothesized that Anomalocaris used this mouth to crush trilobite exoskeletons, more recent analysis suggest it may have been better suited for processing softer prey or manipulating captured organisms to access vulnerable body regions. The creature's visual system ranked among the most sophisticated of its era, featuring massive compound eyes containing thousands of individual lenses that provided exceptional acuity for detecting movement and tracking potential prey. These eyes were proportionally enormous relative to body size, suggesting that vision played a crucial role in Anomalocaris hunting strategies. This combination of enhanced visual capabilities, efficient locomotion, and specialized prey capture appendages created an apex predator that fundamentally altered the ecological dynamics of Cambrian marine communities. Through its systematic predation on other organisms, Anomalocaris became a powerful driver of evolutionary change throughout Cambrian marine communities. The widespread development of protective shells, defensive spines, and sophisticated burrowing behaviors can be directly traced to the selective pressures created by this formidable hunter and its predatory relatives. Its advanced visual system demonstrates the crucial importance that sight-based interactions would assume in predator-prey dynamics, establishing sensory innovations that continue to shape evolutionary processes throughout Earth's biological history. Anomalocaris represented far more than simply another peculiar Cambrian organism. It embodied a fundamental turning point in the development of complex ecosystem dynamics. For contemporary observers, studying Anomalocaris fossils provides opportunities to envision a world where the balance of ecological power was undergoing revolutionary transformation. Prior to the Cambrian period, most life had maintained essentially passive existence patterns, feeding on microbial communities or filtering suspended particles from water columns without engaging in active pursuit behaviors. The emergence of sophisticated predators like Anomalocaris fundamentally altered these dynamics by introducing active hunting strategies that made pursuit, escape, and defense central elements of marine ecosystem function. Ancient oceans transformed into competitive arenas where organisms constantly engaged in contests of maneuvering, visual detection, and survival strategy. Existence was no longer merely about maintaining metabolic processes and reproducing. It required continuously outsmarting, outseeing, and outsurviving other organisms within increasingly complex ecological webs. Anomalocaris serves as a powerful reminder that the Cambrian explosion encompassed much more than simple proliferation of novel body plans and anatomical structures. It represented a comprehensive transformation of ecological roles and interaction patterns that established entirely new categories of biological relationship. The dynamic tension between predators and prey created selective pressures that fueled continuous innovation across all levels of marine communities. The claws, shells, burrows, spines, and armor systems, developed by countless Cambrian animals, collectively document the story of biological communities responding to the presence of apex hunters. Within this evolutionary narrative, Anomalocaris played a central role as a creature that fundamentally redefined what it meant to be an animal within marine environments. Visualizing this magnificent predator gliding through ancient waters with its lateral flaps, undulating in coordinated rhythm, compound eyes scanning for movement, and grasping appendages positioned for strike deployment, we observe not merely an impressive hunter but a symbol of the revolutionary energy that characterized the Cambrian explosion. Life had transcended simple forms to embrace complexity, competition, and unprecedented creativity. At the center of this biological drama swam Anomalocaris, Earth's first great hunter, actively shaping the evolutionary trajectory of surrounding organisms in ways whose influences persist throughout contemporary ecosystems. Its legacy extends far beyond its own extinction, having established predatory principles and prey responses that continue to operate across modern marine environments. As Cambrian marine ecosystems unfolded into realms of novel anatomical forms and behavioral innovations, life refused to remain confined within simple habitat preferences or shallow water limitations. Throughout millions of preceding years, most organisms had maintained close associations with seafloor environments, living near microbial mats, early reef systems, and soft sediment communities that provided essential resources including food, oxygen, and physical stability. However, as ecosystem complexity increased and biological diversity expanded, creatures began systematically exploring previously unoccupied spaces while experimenting with innovative survival strategies. Some species developed swimming capabilities that enabled colonization of water column environments. Others evolved enhanced burrowing abilities for accessing deeper sediment layers, while still others created anatomical and behavioral adaptations that exploited opportunities their evolutionary predecessors had never encountered. This progressive expansion beyond simple shallow water habitats marked a crucial transition in the development of ecological complexity, establishing patterns of habitat diversification and niche specialization that would continue influencing biological communities throughout subsequent geological periods. The seafloor itself underwent dramatic transformation during these revolutionary times. Precambrian environments had been dominated by extensive microbial mats that created relatively uniform habitat conditions across vast geographic areas. The Cambrian explosion brought widespread bioturbation as burrowing animals systematically disrupted these bacterial carpets, mixing sediment layers, creating oxygenated zones at depth, and opening three-dimensional pathways for colonization by diverse organisms. Worms, trilobites, and numerous other excavating species weren't merely living within sediments. They were actively engineering these environments, reshaping seafloor architecture into dynamic multi-layered habitat systems. These modifications enabled multiple organisms to occupy different vertical zones within individual sediment patches, creating unprecedented opportunities for resource partitioning and niche diversification. Some species specialized in surface grazing activities, others developed sophisticated tunneling behaviors for exploiting deeper resources, while predatory forms learned to follow prey into newly created burrow systems. The previously simple flat seafloor transformed into a complex vertically stratified ecosystem, supporting biological communities distributed both horizontally across geographic space and vertically through sediment profiles. Simultaneously, numerous creatures ventured into open water environments that had remained largely unexploited by complex multicellular organisms. For early animals, leaving the relative safety of seafloor habitats represented significant risks, as open water provided fewer refuges from predatory attacks, while exposing organisms to environmental challenges, including current flow and resource scarcity. Yet, these pelagic environments also offered substantial opportunities, including access to suspended food particles, planktonic organisms drifting in ocean currents, and freedom from intense competition within crowded benthic communities. Various arthropod lineages developed specialized flaps and swimming appendages that enabled active locomotion through water columns, while other groups adopted streamlined body configurations optimized for efficient gliding through three-dimensional aquatic space. This upward expansion added entirely new dimensions to ecosystem organization, transforming marine environments from bottom-limited communities into complex, multi-layered systems where life filled available space from seafloor sediments to surface waters. The colonization of water column habitats represented one of the most significant spatial expansions in the history of multicellular life. The rise of sophisticated predators like Anomalocaris made this habitat expansion simultaneously dangerous and evolutionarily necessary. Seafloor-dwelling organisms like trilobites faced constant threat from hunters sweeping overhead, creating strong selective pressures favoring either deeper burrowing capabilities or enhanced swimming abilities that could provide escape routes into different habitat zones. Ecological complexity emerged not only from new opportunities, but also from intense predatory pressure that forced continuous innovation in defensive strategies. Every anatomical or behavioral advancement developed by predatory species encouraged corresponding counter-innovations among prey organisms, creating escalating cycles of adaptation that drove morphological and behavioral diversification far beyond what had been achieved during earlier periods of more peaceful coexistence. As animal communities diversified in both form and function, ecosystem networks became increasingly intricate, establishing interconnected webs of interaction that transcended simple predator-prey relationships. Complexity represents much more than individual organismal sophistication. It emerges from the multiplication and elaboration of connections between different species and functional groups within biological communities. Reef systems contributed significantly to this expansion of ecological complexity through the architectural frameworks constructed by sponges, archaeoceathids, and other pioneering builders. These three-dimensional structures created novel habitat types, where organisms could attach to hard surfaces, shelter within crevices, or graze on microbial films growing across exposed surfaces. Within reef environments, suspension feeding specialists flourished by exploiting enhanced water flow patterns. Predatory forms developed hunting strategies adapted to complex topographic terrain, while various grazing organisms established specialized feeding relationships with microbial communities, colonizing different reef microhabitats. Individual reefs functioned as integrated ecological units rather than simple collections of organisms, providing three-dimensional frameworks that supported biological diversity, far exceeding what was possible in adjacent flat-bottom communities. Although early Cambrian reef systems remained modest compared to later coral formations, their impact on ecosystem complexity proved enormous by demonstrating the potential for biological construction to create entirely new categories of habitat structure. The establishment of reef building as a viable ecological strategy encouraged organisms to develop increasingly specialized lifestyles adapted to the unique opportunities provided by three-dimensional biological architecture. Visual systems played crucial roles in driving ecological complexity through the enhancement of interaction precision and behavioral sophistication. The emergence of compound eyes in organisms like trilobites and Anomalocaris created possibilities for long-distance detection and tracking that fundamentally altered the spatial and temporal scales over which biological interactions could occur. Predators equipped with sophisticated vision could identify and pursue prey across significant distances, while visually capable prey species required enhanced defensive capabilities or behavioral strategies to survive these new threats. This escalation in visual capabilities and corresponding defensive adaptations transformed Cambrian seas into environments of constant testing and refinement, where each anatomical or behavioral innovation triggered cascading responses throughout biological communities. Complexity expanded through continuous cycles of challenge and response, with each adaptive advancement opening new evolutionary pathways, while creating fresh opportunities for further innovation. The cumulative effect of these interconnected developments generated ecosystem complexity that exceeded anything previously achieved in Earth's biological history. Many of these remarkable fossils were initially misidentified as unusual variants of familiar taxonomic groups, reflecting the difficulty scientists faced when confronting organisms that challenged established biological categories. The extraordinary diversity preserved within Burgess Shale deposits wouldn't be fully appreciated until decades after their initial discovery, when renewed scientific investigation revealed the true scope of Cambrian experimental creativity. The exceptional scientific value of the Burgess Shale stems from its unparalleled preservation of soft tissues that normally decay rapidly after organismal death, leaving virtually no trace in the geological record. Within these Canadian deposits, however, fine-grained mudstone and oxygen-depleted conditions combined to create preservation circumstances that sealed organisms quickly, while preventing decomposition processes that would typically destroy delicate anatomical features. Over geological time, carbon compounds from original body tissues left detailed dark impressions within surrounding rock matrices, sometimes capturing even the most minute anatomical structures with remarkable fidelity. Gills, digestive systems, and delicate appendages appear in fossils from this locality, providing direct insights into the anatomy of creatures that would otherwise remain completely unknown to science. The environmental conditions responsible for this extraordinary preservation resulted from highly specific geological circumstances. The Burgess Shale formed at the base of underwater cliff systems where periodic mudflow events buried seafloor communities beneath rapid sediment deposits. These sudden burial events trapped organisms while simultaneously sealing them away from scavenging activities and oxygen exposure, creating optimal conditions for exceptional fossilization. This combination of rapid burial within fine-grained sediments occurs rarely throughout the fossil record, making sites like the Burgess Shale invaluable windows into ancient biological communities that would otherwise remain invisible. From these preserved assemblages, paleontologists have reconstructed comprehensive ecosystem structures that reveal not just individual organisms, but entire networks of ecological interaction. Trilobites navigated muddy substrates while sponges and algae maintained anchored positions on seafloor surfaces. Hallucigenia crawled nearby with its distinctive spines and clawed locomotory appendages, while Opabinia deployed its flexible proboscis to probe sediments for buried prey items. Wiwaxia grazed peacefully with protective spines bristling, and apex predators like Anomalocaris patrolled overhead with massive compound eyes scanning for vulnerable targets. Collectively, these fossils document not merely isolated specimens, but the complex web of relationships that characterize Cambrian marine ecosystems. The Burgess Shale preserves ecological interactions in action, frozen moments from functioning biological communities that operated over 500 million years ago. For decades following Walcott's pioneering work, these extraordinary fossils remained stored in museum collections while their true significance went largely unrecognized. Scientific understanding transformed dramatically during the 1960s and 1970s, when researchers including Harry Whittington, Derek Briggs, and Simon Conway Morris undertook comprehensive re-examination of existing material and recognized its revolutionary implications. These investigators realized that numerous Burgess Shale organisms couldn't be accommodated within existing taxonomic frameworks. Instead, they represented unique morphological experiments, evolutionary innovations unlike anything surviving in contemporary ecosystems. This scientific re-evaluation fundamentally altered understanding of the Cambrian Explosion, shifting interpretation from gradual diversification narratives toward recognition of radical biological innovation. Hallucigenia, once reconstructed in inverted orientation, became an iconic symbol of Burgess Shale strangeness. Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and grasping proboscis, generated both laughter and astonishment when presented at scientific conferences. Anomalocaris, previously interpreted as multiple separate organisms, gained recognition as the period's dominant apex predator. Each of these discovery stories demonstrates how Burgess Shale fossils challenged fundamental assumptions about biological possibility while expanding conceptual boundaries regarding life's potential diversity. These specimens also highlight how much evolutionary history typically remains hidden from scientific investigation due to preservation limitations. Without exceptional fossil localities like the Burgess Shale, contemporary understanding of Cambrian life might be restricted to familiar hard-shelled groups, including trilobites, mollusks, and brachiopods. Instead, these Canadian deposits reveal ancient worlds populated by creatures that establish no modern lineages, organisms representing evolutionary side branches that explored morphological territories never subsequently revisited. They remind us that life's history resembles not a linear progression, but rather a tangled exploration filled with experiments, many of which terminated without leaving descendants. The Burgess Shale documents paths that wave evolution tested but ultimately abandoned, providing crucial evidence for understanding the full scope of biological possibility. Similar exceptional preservation occurs in other global localities, particularly Chinese deposits known as the Chengjiang biota, which often contain fossils even older than Burgess Shale specimens. Together, these sites provide comprehensive documentation of Cambrian diversity across different geographic regions and time intervals, painting global pictures of early animal evolution. However, the Burgess Shale maintains special significance both for its historical importance in shaping scientific understanding and for the exceptional richness of its fossil preservation. Working within these formations resembles opening temporal capsules, where each rock slab might contain undiscovered species, unexpected anatomical details, or clearer insights into previously known organisms. Splitting shale layers requires patience and expertise, but rewards include glimpses of anatomy preserved in stone across more than 500 million years of geological history. Even today, more than a century after initial discovery, new species continue emerging from these rocks, demonstrating that Burgess Shale deposits retain secrets awaiting scientific investigation. Beyond purely academic significance, Burgess Shale fossils have captured public imagination through their apparent alien characteristics that seem almost otherworldly in their strange beauty. Yet these remarkable organisms represent integral components of our own evolutionary heritage, early participants in the same biological experiment that eventually produced human consciousness. Observing Opabinia or Hallucigenia preserved in stone serves as a profound reminder that Earth has hosted life forms far stranger than anything human imagination might devise. The Burgess Shale also teaches important lessons about preservation's inherent fragility and rarity within the fossil record. For every preserved Hallucigenia specimen, countless additional individuals decayed completely before burial could occur. The documentary record available to science remains precious precisely because exceptional preservation occurs so rarely. Each fossil represents survival not only of Cambrian marine environments, but also of subsequent geological processes spanning 500 million years. Mountains rose around these deposits, glacial systems carved surrounding valleys, yet organic impressions persist, waiting for researchers to split appropriate rock layers at opportune moments. Paleontologists studying these materials aren't merely cataloguing ancient species, they're reconstructing entire vanished worlds through scientific investigation. Burgess Shale deposits enable imaginative reconstruction of Cambrian seafloor communities, allowing visualization of creatures feeding, swimming, hiding, and interacting within complex ecological networks. These fossils document not just apex predators but also small grazers, suspension feeders, and reef-building organisms, revealing biological complexity preserved in remarkable detail. This comprehensive preservation earns the Burgess Shale recognition as a fossil diary, documenting not merely what existed but how ancient life functioned, appeared, and moved through prehistoric environments. Each split rock surface reveals scenes from vanished worlds written in stone across geological time. As scientists continue reading these rocky pages, they glimpse not only Earth's biological past, but fundamental characteristics of life itself: creative, experimental, fragile, and remarkably resilient simultaneously. The Cambrian Explosion represents one of the most dramatic events in evolutionary history, providing profound lessons about biological innovation and adaptive radiation. For billions of preceding years, Earth's life remained predominantly microscopic, dominated by bacteria, algae, and simple multicellular forms. Then, within a geologically brief time span, animals possessing shells, sophisticated visual systems, complex appendages, and elaborate body plans appeared throughout marine environments worldwide. This sudden flowering of morphological diversity has fascinated scientists for generations while continuing to shape understanding of evolutionary mechanisms. The Cambrian period demonstrates that life's history unfolds not through steady, gradual progression, but rather through dramatic bursts, experimental innovations, and revolutionary turning points that redirect biological trajectories. Primary lessons from Cambrian studies reveal evolution's simultaneously inventive and opportunistic character. When environmental conditions proved favorable, when atmospheric oxygen concentrations increased, when nutrient availability expanded, when shallow seas flooded continental margins, life responded through explosive diversification into novel forms. The Cambrian explosion wasn't planned or directed toward predetermined goals. However, once ecological conditions aligned appropriately, natural selection began testing countless morphological designs. Some innovations proved remarkably successful, establishing lineages that persist throughout subsequent geological periods. Others represented evolutionary dead ends, strange experiments leaving no descendants yet demonstrating the extraordinary breadth of biological possibility. Burgess shale oddities, including Hallucigenia, Opabenia, and Wiwaxia, serve as powerful reminders that evolution explores numerous pathways, not all of which lead toward long-term success. These fascinating creatures document attempts at biological organization that ultimately proved unsustainable under changing environmental conditions. Cambrian evidence also demonstrates that complexity emerges through dynamic interactions between organisms rather than isolated adaptive changes. Predators like Anomalocaris forced prey species to develop protective shells, defensive spines, and sophisticated burrowing behaviors. Enhanced visual systems evolved to detect threats and opportunities, triggering corresponding evolution of camouflage capabilities and armor systems. This reciprocal escalation, often termed evolutionary arms races, fueled rapid diversification throughout marine ecosystems. Evolution operates not through changes within isolated species, but through constant webs of selective pressures and adaptive responses involving all organisms within ecological communities. The Cambrian provides earliest clear documentation of these dynamic processes, establishing interaction patterns that continue shaping biological evolution today. Another crucial insight involves how major innovations often catalyze further diversification cascades. Visual system evolution didn't merely improve individual organisms' environmental perception, it transformed predator-prey dynamics throughout entire ecosystems, triggering adaptive responses across multiple lineages simultaneously. Hard shell development provided not only individual protection but created entirely new ecological opportunities as predators evolved shell-crushing capabilities, while scavengers exploited fragmentary remains. Even burrowing behaviors generated ripple effects throughout seafloor communities, reshaping sediment characteristics, altering oxygen distribution patterns, and enabling previously impossible organisms to thrive within modified environments. These examples illustrate evolution's layered operational mechanisms, where individual innovations spark additional changes that collectively push life toward unprecedented levels of complexity and diversity. The Cambrian explosion also emphasizes that evolutionary success doesn't necessarily correlate with apparent efficiency or anatomical sophistication. Many preserved Cambrian organisms appear bizarre or impractical from contemporary perspectives, possessing body plans that seem awkward or inefficient. Yet these creatures thrived for millions of years within their original environmental contexts, demonstrating that evolution prioritizes ecological fit over abstract perfection. Survival depends upon adequate niche exploitation rather than optimal design solutions. When environmental conditions shift, previously successful adaptations may become liabilities, leading to lineage extinction despite earlier evolutionary success. Cambrian ecosystems hosted both survivors and casualties, with both categories providing essential insights into evolutionary processes. The Cambrian explosion's lasting legacy lies not merely in its documentation of ancient biological diversity, but in its revelation of life's extraordinary creative potential when environmental conditions permit experimental innovation on unprecedented scales. This extraordinary resilience enabled life to persist through subsequent mass extinctions and environmental upheavals that have periodically challenged Earth's biological communities throughout geological history. Diversity fundamentally provides evolutionary options, and within the context of natural selection, options represent the ultimate currency of survival. The Cambrian period marked the pivotal moment when life dramatically expanded its portfolio of adaptive possibilities, establishing the foundational framework upon which all subsequent biological evolution would build. For researchers dedicated to understanding animal origins, the Cambrian Explosion presents both formidable intellectual challenges and sources of perpetual wonder. It challenges scientific minds to explain why such an extraordinary array of morphological forms emerged within such a compressed geological time frame, requiring explanations that integrate not merely biological processes, but also geological transformations, chemical innovations, and stochastic events that shaped evolutionary trajectories. Simultaneously, it fills observers with profound wonder by revealing life's remarkable inventive capacity when environmental conditions permit unprecedented experimentation. The apparent strangeness of Cambrian creatures shouldn't be dismissed as mere paleontological curiosity. Rather, it represents direct evidence of evolution's raw creative power operating under optimal conditions for biological innovation. When we examine Cambrian fossils preserved within ancient shale formations, we're witnessing far more than simply preserved remnants of extinct animals. We're observing fundamental evolutionary principles in dynamic action, experimental diversification, ecological interaction, morphological innovation, and selective extinction. We're documenting the ancestral roots of our own lineage alongside countless alternative evolutionary pathways that ultimately vanished without modern descendants. These ancient specimens serve as powerful reminders that life simultaneously embodies both fragility and resilience, capable of experiencing catastrophic collapse in certain manifestations while flourishing dramatically in entirely different forms. The Cambrian Explosion transcends its role as merely another chapter in Earth's biological history. It functions as a comprehensive lesson in evolutionary mechanics and the underlying reasons why contemporary life exhibits its current characteristics. This remarkable period demonstrates that animal evolution follows not linear progression, but rather branching, twisting exploration of morphological possibilities. It reveals how survival outcomes result from complex interactions between adaptive innovations and chance circumstances. Most significantly, it shows how the biological diversity observable today rests upon foundational patterns established over 500 million years ago in ancient seas where trilobites navigated seafloors, sponges maintained filter-feeding positions, and sophisticated predators equipped with compound eyes hunted throughout shallow marine environments. When we study Cambrian paleontology, we're engaging with more than historical retrospection. We're learning how evolutionary processes continue shaping contemporary ecosystems while establishing frameworks that will influence future biological development. The oceans that once supported Opabinia and Anomalocaris have long since vanished, but the fundamental principles governing their existence remain identical to those operating within modern biological systems. The Cambrian period teaches us that environmental change represents a constant evolutionary force, that biological diversity provides essential resilience, and that life's developmental trajectory consistently exceeds our predictive expectations. These lessons remain profoundly relevant as we navigate contemporary ecological challenges and consider the future trajectory of Earth's biological communities. 500 million years have elapsed since Cambrian seas rippled with trilobites, sponges, worms, and enigmatic predators, sporting grasping appendages and compound eyes that gleamed like miniature jewels beneath ancient sunlight. The marine environments themselves have transformed beyond recognition through continental drift, while atmospheric composition has evolved to incorporate oxygen concentrations that those pioneering organisms helped establish and stabilize. Yet the revolutionary changes initiated during the Cambrian Explosion continue resonating throughout every contemporary organism, every fish navigating modern oceans, every insect traversing terrestrial environments, every bird soaring through atmospheric currents, and every human contemplating this remarkable history carries within its biological architecture the lasting imprint of innovations first developed within those primordial waters. Understanding why the Cambrian period maintains contemporary relevance requires recognizing it not as some distant paleontological curiosity, but rather as the fundamental foundation supporting all modern life. This ancient period's continuing significance echoes through multiple dimensions of contemporary biological reality. The first echo resonates through the structural architecture of our own bodies. Prior to Cambrian times, animal life remained predominantly soft-bodied, morphologically simple, and severely limited in organizational complexity. During the explosion itself, crucial innovations emerged that continue defining biological systems today: skeletal frameworks, protective shells, sophisticated visual organs, feeding apparatus, and segmented appendages. The notochord, initially appearing as a flexible supportive rod within small chordates like Picaia, eventually became the vertebral column supporting all vertebrate life, ultimately leading to the evolutionary radiation that produced fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Without that initially modest structural innovation, none of the subsequent complexity characterizing vertebrate existence, including human consciousness, would have been achievable. The Cambrian period serves as a powerful reminder that even seemingly minor biological beginnings can generate immense consequences that reverberate across geological timescales. Another persistent echo manifests within ecosystem organization itself. The Cambrian marked the first period when marine food webs assumed configurations recognizable within contemporary biological communities. Distinct ecological roles emerged, including apex predators, various prey categories, scavenging specialists, and suspension-feeding organisms, all interacting within complex networks of energy transfer and survival strategy. This fundamental balance of ecological functions continues governing ecosystem dynamics today. Lions prowling African savannas, sharks patrolling oceanic waters, or hawks hunting from aerial positions occupy ecological niches remarkably similar to those filled by Anomalocaris gliding through Cambrian seas. Herbivorous organisms, grazing specialists, and filter-feeding communities continue filling intermediate trophic levels while decomposing organisms and scavenging species process organic remains. The Cambrian period established when ecosystems first achieved complex, vertically stratified organization, creating templates that have persisted throughout subsequent geological history. The Cambrian period also initiated the concept of evolutionary arms races, competitive dynamics that have never ceased operating within biological communities. When trilobites developed protective exoskeletons, predatory species adapted mechanisms for prying them open or accessing vulnerable undersides. As sophisticated visual systems evolved for detecting environmental threats, corresponding camouflage capabilities and defensive armor emerged as evolutionary countermeasures. Contemporary examples continue demonstrating these same dynamic principles, cheetahs and gazelles perpetually refining their respective pursuit and escape capabilities, bats and moths engaging in ongoing sensory warfare, wolves and deer maintaining predator-prey optimization, humans and pathogenic organisms adapting to overcome each other's defensive innovations. These competitive principles remain timeless, with individual innovations consistently triggering corresponding counter-innovations within interconnected cycles of adaptation. This fundamental pattern began operating earnestly during Cambrian times, and we continue existing within its ongoing influence. The Cambrian fossil record provides another crucial echo with contemporary significance by demonstrating how incomplete our understanding of life becomes when restricted to organisms that successfully survive to the present. Without exceptional preservation sites like the Burgess Shale, scientific knowledge would never have encompassed creatures such as Opobinia or Hallucigenia. This realization promotes intellectual humility by recognizing that just as entire evolutionary branches vanished, leaving only faint geological impressions, countless additional lineages may have thrived without creating any preservational record whatsoever. Even within contemporary ecosystems, we remain surrounded by species awaiting scientific discovery, quietly influencing ecological dynamics without human recognition. The Cambrian period teaches that our perspective on biological diversity remains perpetually partial, and that mystery constitutes an integral component of life's inherent richness, rather than merely a temporary gap in scientific knowledge. Important lessons also emerge regarding the dynamic relationship between resilience and fragility within biological systems. While the Cambrian Explosion represented a period of unprecedented morphological creativity, it simultaneously witnessed extensive extinction events, Many body plans preserved within Burgess Shale deposits subsequently disappeared, unable to adapt to shifting environmental conditions or intensifying competitive pressures. Survival was never guaranteed, even within environments characterized by abundant resources and opportunities. This historical message carries stark relevance for contemporary conservation concerns, as human activities drive extinction rates approaching those associated with ancient mass mortality events. The Cambrian period demonstrates that extinction has always functioned as an integral component of life's developmental story, while simultaneously illustrating diversity's crucial value as evolutionary insurance. The greater the variety of forms that life creates, the enhanced its collective chances for enduring environmental challenges. This fundamental truth maintains urgent significance within our current era of rapid ecological change. The Cambrian Explosion also emphasizes chance's profound influence on evolutionary outcomes. Which organisms successfully survived and which lineages vanished wasn't entirely determined by apparent superiority or optimal adaptation. Opabinia failed to establish lasting descendants, while early chordates succeeded, though neither group appeared destined for their respective fates based on contemporary assessment. Evolution operates not as linear progression toward predetermined improvement, but rather as complex exploration shaped by environmental accidents, ecological opportunities, and shifting geological circumstances. This recognition carries important implications for understanding our own species' position within evolutionary history. Humans represent not evolution's inevitable outcome, but merely one branch among countless alternatives, a lineage that could have been eliminated by chance events throughout its developmental history. Recognizing this contingency helps us appreciate both the fragility and remarkable nature of our existence. The Cambrian period continues providing inspiration for scientific investigation and creative imagination through the alien appearance of its preserved organisms. These creatures appear otherworldly to contemporary observers, yet they represent our own evolutionary ancestors or distant relatives within life's family tree. Studying these ancient forms expands conceptual boundaries regarding biological possibility. In an era when humanity searches for extraterrestrial life, the Cambrian Explosion reminds us that extraordinary strangeness requires no interplanetary travel. It has already existed here on Earth within the peculiar spines of Wilwaxia or the five-eyed configuration of Opabinia. Cambrian biological diversity provides compelling evidence that evolutionary processes can generate forms far exceeding familiar contemporary expectations, demonstrating life's capacity for invention under optimal environmental conditions. The Cambrian Explosion fundamentally shapes how we conceptualize and teach evolutionary theory by providing vivid demonstration that evolution can produce dramatic morphological change within relatively compressed temporal periods. While not instantaneous, 20 to 30 million years represents rapid transformation compared to billions of preceding years dominated by microbial communities. This temporal perspective helps illuminate other periods of accelerated evolutionary change, such as mammalian radiation following dinosaur extinction events. The Cambrian period shows that when environmental opportunities arise, life responds with a remarkable speed and creativity, establishing patterns that continue operating within contemporary ecosystems. Perhaps most personally, every living organism today carries within its biological architecture the direct legacy of Cambrian ancestors. When you manipulate objects with your hands, you're utilizing skeletal and muscular systems derived from patterns first established within early chordates. When you perceive environmental information through vision, you're employing sensory organs whose evolutionary heritage traces back to the initial compound eyes of trilobites and Anomalocaris. The atmospheric oxygen that sustains your cellular metabolism was partly stabilized through biogeochemical cycles, influenced by Cambrian ecosystem dynamics. To exist today means living with the continuing gifts of that ancient world, whether we consciously acknowledge these connections or not. The Cambrian period also transforms our temporal perspective by stretching imagination across 500 million years of geological time. Envisioning ancient seas lacking fish, coral reefs, or familiar marine vertebrates challenges conventional thinking about biological normalcy. Holding Burgess Shale fossils creates tangible bridges across vast temporal distances, enabling physical contact with organisms that inhabited Earth before terrestrial plants, flowering species, or even vertebrates possessed functional jaws. This connection to deep geological time fundamentally alters our understanding of humanity's position within cosmic history. We exist not separate from this ancient narrative, but rather as its direct continuation. The Cambrian Explosion represents an integral component of our species' story, written long before human consciousness emerged to contemplate its significance. Finally, the Cambrian period matters because it reveals life's extraordinary creative potential operating under optimal conditions. Within those ancient seas, evolutionary processes didn't merely refine existing designs, but rather invented entirely novel organizational principles. Eyes, skeletal systems, complex appendages, and sophisticated organ systems all appeared in variations that established foundations for all subsequent biological development. The apparent strangeness of these ancient animals represents not mere paleontological curiosity, but rather compelling testimony to life's achievable potential. It demonstrates that biological possibilities remain vast, and that creative innovation is fundamentally woven into evolution's operational fabric. Therefore, when we consider why the Cambrian Explosion maintains contemporary relevance, the answer proves both elegantly simple and profoundly significant. It matters because we actively live within its continuing legacy. It matters because it demonstrates diversity's power, chance's crucial role, the intimate relationships between planetary and biological evolution, and existence's inherent fragility. It matters because it reminds us that what appears strange today was once completely ordinary, and what seems ordinary now may eventually appear strange to future observers contemplating our era. The Cambrian period hasn't vanished into irrelevant antiquity. It remains vibrantly present within every creature, every ecosystem, every moment of contemporary life on this planet. And so we gradually drift back from those ancient seas, carrying within our consciousness the shapes and echoes of a world 500 million years vanished, yet still dynamically alive within every movement of the present moment. If you found this journey through Cambrian times somewhat calming, intellectually curious, or simply companionable during quiet moments, please feel welcome to maintain these connections. Countless additional stories await discovery beneath the surface of deep time's endless mysteries. Until our paths cross again, take gentle care of yourself, and thank you for sharing this exploration through the magnificent foundations of complex life.